Hey guys. Tonight we drift into the quiet, candle-soft corridors of a Tudor court where one gentle girl is about to step into a storm she never asked for. You settle back as the hush of the evening wraps around you, and you find yourself wandering through the muted tapestry of Jane Seymour's early world. A place where ambition whispers through velvet curtains and where every polite bow hides a dozen sharp intentions. You can almost smell the beeswax polishing the wooden floors. Hear the distant murmurs of courtiers trying to sound important, and feel that little tug in your stomach reminding you that if you ever had to survive a Tudor palace, well, you probably wouldn't last a day. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're settling in, tell me in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is over there, because there's something calming about knowing our tiny constellation of night owls is scattered across the world. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. You take a slow breath as the scene deepens. And suddenly you're walking beside young Jane Seymour herself. She's not dazzling like Anne Boleyn, nor fiercely educated like Catherine Parr will be one day. Instead, she moves with the steady softness of someone who has learned early how not to disturb the air around her. Her footsteps barely whisper across the manor's stone floors. You watch her pause near a window, letting a shaft of pale English light fall across her hands that will one day sign documents as queen. Though right now their greatest ambition is stitching neat little roses into a piece of linen. You can feel the simplicity of her upbringing, modest nobility. Well-born but not extraordinary. The kind of childhood where you learn to curtsy before you learn to question anything. And yet, as you observe her, there's something more beneath the quiet surface. A patience, a steadiness. The calm center in a world that is about to start spinning far too fast. When she enters court service, it happens almost like a soft footstep in a crowded room, easy to miss if you're not paying attention. You follow her up the narrow wooden stairs into the palace's women's quarters, where everything smells faintly of lavender sachets and political anxiety. She becomes a lady-in-waiting, first to Catherine of Aragon, though we'll drift deeper into that later. For now, you focus on the way she watches everything around her, taking it all in without announcing herself. Other girls her age giggle in the corners or practice smiles designed for strategic encounters, courtly survival skills. Really, but Jane just listens. You hear it too, the swirl of gossip. Who's in favor? Who's out? Who's wearing colors that should have been approved but mysteriously weren't? And right here, you notice the first little truth history often skims past. Jane's quietness wasn't timid, it was tactical. A silken shield. As you wander through these early halls with her, the Tudor court feels almost alive. A breathing organism with moods that change faster than the English weather. Courtiers glide past, each one projecting confidence but secretly praying not to annoy the king, or his advisors, or his wife, or the people who think they should advise the advisors. It's a whole ecosystem of controlled panic. You glance at Jane, half expecting her to crumble under the noise. But she doesn't. She simply folds herself into the background like a perfectly aligned tapestry thread. And maybe that's her secret. In a world full of people trying to shine, she learns the power of gentleness, the way being overlooked can be its own kind of protection. There's a dry little joke floating in your mind. If Tudor palace life were a reality show, Jane would be the contestant who quietly makes it to the finale because everyone else implodes. Some historians still debate whether she had real political instinct this early on, or whether she was simply, well, quiet. They argue about it the way scholars love to argue, politely but with the intensity of people who haven't slept enough. But as you watch her now, you see how she notices who speaks too loudly, who flatters too boldly, who avoids which doorways and why. She's learning the room like a musician learns scales, softly, steadily, preparing for a performance no one expects from her. You drift with her into a chapel, where candles flicker with the same trembling uncertainty that seems to hover over the kingdom itself. Henry VIII hasn't yet shattered England's religious landscape, but the tremors have begun. You can feel the tension in the air, like the hum before a thunderstorm. Jane kneels, her breath barely stirring. She's devout, yes, but more than that. She understands the comfort of rituals, the anchor they provide when the world begins to tilt into chaos. There's a small, lesser-known detail here, a truth tucked into the dusty corners of old accounts. Jane's family, the Seymours, were loyal but not entirely influential at this stage, yet somehow they had a talent for appearing exactly where fortune would soon pass by. Almost like they studied the winds of opportunity the way sailors read tides. You sense it now in the way Jane moves through the palace, not chasing destiny, but leaving the door politely ajar in case it decides to visit. You pause with her again in one of those drafty Tudor corridors, where the tapestries flutter as if trying to whisper their own warnings. The air smells faintly of damp stone and the sweet, smoky residue of 100 extinguished candles. Somewhere down the hallway, a courtier is laughing too loudly at something definitely not funny. Court politics are brewing, though Jane doesn't yet step into the center of them. She remains the quiet girl with steady eyes and hands that can stitch roses so lifelike they almost bloom. And maybe that's why you feel a soft tug of sympathy. She has no idea what's coming, no inkling that her stillness will soon catch the attention of a restless king. No warning that her gentleness will be mistaken for perfect compliance in a palace that devours its queens like bedtime stories gone wrong. You want to reach out. Maybe tell her to run or hide or at least pretend to have a chronic, queen-proof allergy, but you're only a drifting observer, watching a young woman walking toward a destiny stitched with both triumph and tragedy. As the candles burn low in this section of your journey, you feel the gentle pull forward, toward a palace where Jane's quiet presence is about to meet the noise of royal power. And though the story hasn't yet turned sharp, you can sense the shift coming, like the softest footstep behind you in an empty hall. The corridor stretches ahead, warm, dim, waiting. And you follow her. You follow Jane's steps as she moves deeper into the palace. And suddenly the corridors feel narrower, as if the walls themselves are leaning in to eavesdrop. Being a lady-in-waiting sounds glamorous in the modern world, like having backstage passes to royal drama, but as you walk beside her now, you feel the weight of it. Her role is service, routine, and endless observation, and you, drifting just behind her shoulder, sense how every moment is a test disguised as etiquette. Jane serves Queen Catherine of Aragon, the first wife of Henry VIII. And you notice immediately how different the atmosphere is here, quieter, steadier, threaded with a kind of resilient sorrow. Catherine moves through her chambers like someone who has learned to carry dignity the way others carry jewelry, gracefully, but with a hidden burden. And Jane, with her soft eyes and steady hands, seems to understand this in a way few others do. You watch her help Catherine dress, fastening intricate sleeves that look like medieval engineering projects. The air smells faintly of rosewater and starch, a scent that might be calming if not for the tension humming beneath every movement. Jane listens more than she speaks, gliding through her duties with that same feather-light step you noticed before. She knows when to hand a comb, when to bring wine, when to remain absolutely still. Skills that look simple but in court life are basically Olympic-level emotional intelligence. There's a moment when Catherine pauses, her reflection wavering in a polished metal mirror. Jane gently adjusts the Queen's hood, and you feel the unspoken understanding between them. Catherine is aging. She is losing her political foothold. Henry's attention has shifted elsewhere. And Jane, though no one could guess what future awaits her, absorbs this quiet sadness like a sponge. A small, lesser-known truth flickers here. Jane's time with Catherine shaped her far more deeply than history tends to admit. Some early records suggest that she admired Catherine's unwavering piety, adopting a similar seriousness in her own devotions. Others whisper that Jane learned something subtler, how a queen carries grace under pressure, how faith becomes armor when power starts slipping through your fingers. Whether that's romanticized or real, well, historians still argue about it, of course. But as you watch her now, smoothing a fold at Catherine's shoulder, you see that she's learning, not by ambition, but by osmosis. When Jane steps out of Catherine's chambers and into the larger palace, the tone changes sharply, like walking from a cathedral into a marketplace. The court buzzes with the noise of speculation. The king's marriage is faltering. Anne Boleyn is hovering like a comet with a fiery tail. And everyone is recalibrating alliances the way you might adjust a phone's brightness when you step outside. You trail Jane through a cluster of courtiers, and they barely register her presence. It's not malice, just hierarchy. She is quiet background color, the kind of person others overlook because they assume she has no power worth noticing. Which, ironically, is often the most dangerous assumption. You can almost hear the future snickering softly in the distance. Jane carries documents, messages, embroidery frames, whatever the day requires. She walks past Anne Boleyn's ladies, who speak in excited bursts, tossing comments like little sparks that might turn into fires. They discuss new dresses, diplomatic rumors, Henry's latest moods, because Henry's moods are practically their own form of weather. One small cloud on his face and suddenly everyone is having a very bad day. You hear one girl whisper about how Anne has changed everything, the court's fashion, its language, its energy, and tucked inside her tone is the sharp edge of envy. Not all of Anne's ladies like her. Some simply orbit her because they must. Court politics. Fun for no one. Essential for everyone. Jane slips past them like a shadow with perfect timing. She keeps her gaze low. But you sense her awareness prickling. She notices everything, even if she pretends not to. That's her quiet genius. She's studying the room without ever seeming to. If observation were a superpower, Jane's cape would be invisible but extremely efficient. When she arrives again at Catherine's side, the Queen is writing a letter. The scratching of the quill fills the room like a slow heartbeat. And here you catch a detail often lost to time. Jane sometimes helped manage Catherine's correspondence, not writing it, of course, but organizing materials, preparing wax seals, keeping things orderly, the kind of backstage support that doesn't make it into textbooks, but shapes the rhythm of daily royal life. You drift close enough to watch Catherine pause, pressing her fingers to her temples. Jane offers a cup of warm spiced wine, and Catherine accepts it with a tired but grateful nod. In this small gesture, you glimpse the compassion that will later define Jane as queen, a soft understanding of suffering. A willingness to serve not for advantage but because she feels moved to soothe. But while Jane tends to Catherine, the palace itself is shifting. You sense it like a rumble beneath your feet. The king is pulling away from his marriage. Anne Boleyn is rising, dazzling, dangerous, and every courtier is preparing to jump to whichever branch of power stays upright longest. It's political musical chairs, except the loser gets exiled or worse. Jane remains where she is, steady as a candle flame. She is not jockeying for position, not flirting, not scheming, yet somehow, this makes her stand out more. In a court full of fireworks, she is the quiet lantern, and people don't realize how comforting lanterns can be until everything goes dark. One afternoon, as you accompany her through the Queen's gallery, sunlight flickers across her face. She pauses, hearing distant footsteps, the king's retinue. She doesn't tense, she doesn't blush, she doesn't try to be seen. She simply steps aside with effortless grace. But Henry VIII notices her anyway. His glance is brief, a passing spark, but you feel the shift. A tiny pivot in fate's wheel. Jane doesn't react outwardly, but something inside the air changes. Subtle, barely perceptible, like the first drop of rain that hints at a coming storm. Later, she returns to her tasks while the palace murmurs around her. Gossip thrives here, sprawling across the halls like ivy. But Jane keeps her thoughts folded neatly within herself. She focuses on Catherine, loyal, dutiful, kind, and though she cannot know it, this loyalty will one day haunt her, shaping how people judge her rise. As night deepens around the palace, you feel the quiet settle again. Cooling like ink, Jane withdraws to her small chamber, where the candlelight softens her features. She kneels to pray, her voice barely above a whisper. Maybe she prays for Catherine, maybe for strength, maybe simply for peace in a world that rarely offers any. You watch her extinguish the candle, leaving only the faint glow of moonlight across the floor. And you sense it, the story tightening, pulling her towards something impossible to escape. A quiet girl in waiting, a kingdom in motion, and fate, stretching its fingers toward her. You drift into the next day with Jane, moving through the palace as if wrapped in a soft shawl of murmurs and candle smoke. The Tudor court wakes early, well, some of it wakes early, the rest simply pretends, but you feel the whole structure humming with nervous energy. Something is shifting, almost imperceptibly, like the tightening of a lute string before it snaps. And at the center of that subtle change is a glance. Just a glance. The fleeting moment when Henry VIII allowed his gaze to slide across Jane Seymour as though she were a quiet shoreline he had somehow overlooked. You sense it now. The way the air thickens whenever the king enters a room. His footsteps resonate with the certainty of a man who believes the entire kingdom is an extension of his own hand, and yet, beneath the swagger, there's a hint of frustration, a growing imbalance. His marriage to Catherine is fracturing. His obsession with Anne Boleyn is blazing. And he carries all the intensity of someone about to rewrite the rules simply because they annoy him. When you follow Jane into the Queen's gallery, the sunlight glints off Henry's rings as he speaks with advisors. He looks exhausted, temper simmering just below the surface. His political headaches are legendary, if migraines could take human form and wear robes. They would look like Tudor statesmen. And here, amid this swirling courtly chaos, Jane moves with gentle precision, adjusting the Queen's embroidery frame or tidying a cushion without drawing a single extra breath of attention. Which, ironically, is exactly what draws his attention. From your place just behind her shoulder, you notice Henry's gaze catch on her like a hook. It lingers, not hungry, not dramatic, simply curious. Quiet curiosity from a king can be more dangerous than a shouted decree. You can almost hear the palace holding its breath. Jane doesn't see the look. Or maybe she does and simply chooses to ignore it. Her eyes remain on her task. Her posture impeccable. Her presence calm enough to soothe a restless horse. Meanwhile, Anne Boleyn sweeps into the room, bringing with her the electric crackle of a woman who has spent years surviving a court that both adores and despises her. Anne is brilliant, sharp, and beautifully volatile, like a chandelier made of knives. You witness the slightest shift. Anne sees Henry looking at Jane. That small moment, that tiny flicker of recognition, is a spark tossed into dry straw. The king says nothing, Jane says nothing, Anne says nothing. But the silence is thunderous. Later, Jane steps into a quieter hallway, carrying folded linens toward Catherine's chambers. You drift with her, feeling the cool stone beneath your imagined feet, listening to distant footsteps echo like ghostly punctuation. And that's when you hear it, two chambermaids whispering behind a tapestry, trying desperately to sound subtle but failing spectacularly. Did you see the king look at her? At her? Really? She looks like she'd apologize for breathing too loudly. Well, maybe that's exactly what he wants now. The giggle that follows is sharp enough to cut thread. Jane hears none of it, or she pretends not to. Either way, she continues her slow, steady path, unaware that her life has just pivoted half a degree toward destiny. It's such a small motion that even fate itself might not fully register it yet. In Catherine's chambers, the Queen reads a letter, likely from her nephew. The powerful Charles V. Jane helps her roll a fresh sheet of parchment, smoothing its edges with serene focus. Catherine looks tired, but warm. There's a heaviness around her, the weight of a crown slipping gradually beyond her grasp. Jane's presence soothes her. Loyalty radiates from the girl like a quiet perfume. But halfway through the afternoon, Henry sends for Jane. It's a simple request, relayed through a gentleman of the Privy Chamber, nothing dramatic, nothing scandalous, just the king asking for one of Catherine's ladies to deliver a report. Or a document, Or maybe he makes up an excuse entirely. Kings are versatile like that. You follow Jane as she approaches the king's presence chamber. Each step slow and cautious. She knocks, enters, and curtsies with such modesty that the entire room seems to soften around her. Henry dismisses the others. He studies Jane as though she is a puzzle with pieces he didn't realize he wanted to assemble. "Stand," he says, and his voice carries that peculiar mix of authority and exhaustion. Jane obeys. He asks gentle questions about her family, her service, her duties. His tone is mild, almost tender, and while he speaks, you notice something unusual. He's calm. Not roaring, not charming, not tossing blame around like birdseed. Just calm, as if Jane's presence cools whatever fires have been raging inside him. A lesser-known truth slips into focus here. Henry valued gentleness in ways history often overlooks. It soothed him, reassured him, counterbalanced the tempest of his own personality. That Jane's demeanor appealed to him isn't surprising, that it appealed to him now, amid turmoil, is almost inevitable. But then comes the pivotal moment, quiet, simple, perfectly dangerous. Henry hands Jane a small purse of coins. A gift. A gesture. A test. Jane lowers her eyes, the corners of her mouth tightening. Her fingers tremble as she holds the purse. But not from excitement, from dread. And here is the detail many forget: she refused. Jane Seymour refused a king. With careful respect, she sets the purse back in Henry's hand and steps back as though distancing herself from a lit candle. "My family has no need of such," she murmurs. "Your Majesty's favor is reward enough." It is a breathtakingly bold move for someone so gentle. Henry watches her, stunned but enthralled. Kings rarely hear the word no, and almost never from someone who means it sincerely. The refusal doesn't push him away, it pulls him in deeper. It intrigues him, captivates him, whispers to him that she is not another Anne, not another Catherine, not another woman shaped by court ambitions. She is something he does not yet understand. When Jane leaves the room, your breath feels caught somewhere between awe and worry. You can sense, as she cannot, the invisible threads tightening, the king's interest solidifying, the court's gossip coiling, Anne's jealousy sharpening like a blade honed in secret. Jane walks back toward Catherine's chambers, unaware that she has just crossed a threshold. She blends back into her duties, quiet as ever, but her world is already tilting. The palace corridors feel narrower. The whispers feel closer. Fate feels bolder. For now, though, she remains simply Jane, gentle, observant, steady. The storm hasn't touched her yet. But you can feel the first wind stirring in the halls behind her. You slip into the next stretch of palace corridors beside Jane, and the air feels different now, charged. Like the static that lifts the hairs on your arms right before a summer storm. Nothing obvious has happened yet. No grand announcement or scandalous reveal. But the court has a nose for shifts in power the way dogs have a nose for, well, everything. You can almost hear it, the whisper network awakening, stretching, licking its metaphorical chops. Jane continues her duties in Catherine's service, moving with that same serene modesty. But the atmosphere follows her like a shadow with opinions. People who barely noticed her last week now angle their heads as she passes. Friendly smiles become just a little too curious. Neutral faces linger a second too long. Someone in a far corner pretends to drop a handkerchief for the sole purpose of having something to hide behind while staring at her. Court life is basically the Renaissance version of social media. Everyone pretending they aren't watching while absolutely watching. But the moment that truly begins to tighten the threads of rivalry happens when Jane and Anne Boleyn step into the same space again. You drift into the Queen's gallery with Jane, arms full of folded linens. Anne is already there, radiant in a rich shade of crimson that practically shouts, "I'm still queen, thank you very much." The air bends around her, she has gravity. Heat, edges. Anne doesn't enter rooms, she ignites them. Jane, by contrast, is cool shade under a tree. The kind of shade you don't appreciate until you've been standing in the sun too long. Anne notices Jane immediately. Her gaze flickers over the girl with a sharp, assessing intelligence that makes you feel slightly inspected yourself. You sense the discomfort in Jane's shoulders. The fragile stiffness that comes from knowing you're being evaluated by someone who understands danger far too well. "Lady Seymour," Anne says, voice smooth and clipped, like silk stretched over glass. "You seem busy these days." It's not a question, more like a gentle thrust of a rapier made to look like a hug. Jane curtsies, murmuring something polite, something safe. Non-reactive, beautifully neutral, but the neutrality itself is a statement. Anne hates neutrality. Anne thrives on tension, on clarity, on people choosing sides, and Jane refuses to choose. As you watch, you feel the rivalry crystallizing, not loud, not theatrical, but edged with the uneasy awareness that the king's shifting attention is the kind of threat that doesn't announce itself until it's too late. The court begins to divide in whispers. "Did you hear?" Anne is furious. The king looked at Lady Seymour again. "They say she returned his gift." "Who does that?" "Someone very clever or very foolish." Rumor is the court's oxygen. And tonight it burns bright. You follow Jane into a smaller chamber later that afternoon, where she tries to focus on embroidery. Her fingers move automatically, rose, vine, leaf, but every stitch carries the faint tremor of being watched. And she is being watched. Two of Anne's ladies linger in the doorway, speaking softly but not softly enough. "She's too plain," one says. "That's exactly the point," the other replies. "Men like variety, and the king hasn't had plain in a while." Ouch, even you wince at that. You want to tap Jane gently on the shoulder and tell her to maybe switch careers, pottery? Beekeeping? Something with far fewer beheadings, but you're only a drifting presence in this unfolding tragedy. Yet Jane doesn't react, not outwardly. She folds her hands, lowers her lashes, and breathes through the discomfort with that trademark quiet resilience. It's a survival skill no one taught her. It simply grew in her like wild thyme, small, fragrant, unassuming, yet stubborn. And here's the little-known truth. Jane didn't openly oppose Anne. Nor did she ever speak ill of her. That wasn't her way. She didn't fight fire with fire. She fought it with damp wool and silence. Some historians interpret this as innocence. Others say it was a subtle form of political instinct. And, yes, they're still arguing about it somewhere over cold coffee and underfunded library lighting. Later, you accompany Jane to chapel again. The air is scented with beeswax and incense, and the flickering glow of candles reflects off her pale features. She kneels, hands clasped, posture perfectly still. Only in prayer does the tension leave her shoulders. You can almost hear the soft exhale she doesn't dare release anywhere else. A detail many overlook. Jane was known for her devotion, but also for her discipline in presenting herself as morally above reproach. Not in a sanctimonious way, more like someone carefully protecting herself from a world that has teeth. She knows she cannot compete with Anne's charisma or Catherine's dignity. But she can be unimpeachable. She can be steady. She can be, in a court of flashing colors, the quiet, unbroken line. And that terrifies people far more than beauty ever could. When she rises from prayer, she steps into a hallway where Anne appears again, this time alone. Eyes sharp, expression brittle, you feel the tension snap taut between them. Anne approaches slowly, like someone circling a riddle. "You serve the Queen faithfully," she says, and though the words are neutral, the implication trails behind them like smoke. Jane bows her head. "Always, Your Majesty." Anne studies her, searching for cracks, for ambition, for any hint that Jane might want something she should not want. But Jane gives her nothing, no fear, no eagerness, no defiance, just quiet respect. And that nothingness rattles Anne more than a full confession ever could. Because people like Anne understand threats that shout. It's the ones that whisper that unsettle them. As the day closes, you follow Jane back to her small chamber, where she unties her sleeves with fingers that tremble just slightly. She sits on the edge of her bed, candlelight flickering across her face. Her eyes drift to the window, where the night gathers like ink pooling in the corners of the world. She doesn't know it yet, but the king's interest, and Anne's jealousy, have already woven her into the next act of a story with no gentle endings. A story that will sweep her from the background into the center of history's harshest spotlight. But for now, she simply folds her hands and closes her eyes, trying to hold onto the piece slipping like sand through her fingers. Quiet Jane, watchful Jane, a lantern caught between two storms. And the darkness deepens around her. You slip back into the rhythm of palace life beside Jane, and the day begins with a low hum. One of those mornings where even the sunlight seems hesitant. As though it, too, has picked up on the tension threading through the Tudor court. It doesn't take long for you to realize why. Something is brewing in the king's private chambers. Something wrapped not in scandalous whispers but in velvet and ceremony. Henry VIII is preparing a gesture, not toward Anne, not toward Catherine, but toward Jane, and you can already feel the palace bracing itself, like a forest sensing the first twitch of wind before a wildfire. The message arrives for her just after sunrise. The king wishes to speak with Lady Seymour. Again, the phrase alone is enough to send a ripple through the women around her, each pretending not to react while absolutely reacting. Jane lowers her eyes, murmurs acknowledgement, and continues helping Catherine dress. But you sense the stiffness in her fingertips. She knows this isn't routine. Nothing about the king noticing you is ever routine. You follow her into the king's presence chamber later that morning. The space feels warm, heavy with the scent of burning resin and the musk of a dozen tapestries that have absorbed centuries of ambition. Henry stands at a window, gazing out as if scanning the horizon for answers that never arrive. When he turns to greet Jane, there's a softness in his expression, a strange, almost boyish warmth you haven't seen in him before. He holds out a small box. "Lady Seymour," he says, voice gentle but threaded with authority. "For your service." Jane curtsies. Hesitant, she opens the box. Inside, nestled in folds of deep crimson velvet, lies a brooch shaped like a tiny falcon, gold, pearl-tipped, exquisitely crafted, unmistakably valuable. It glints like a held breath. And here it is. The moment the palace will spend the next week gossiping about. Jane stares at the gift for several seconds too long. Not in awe, in dread. She remembers the purse of coins she returned. She remembers the queen she serves. She remembers the storm circling Anne Boleyn. And in her silence, the tension thickens. Finally, with slow, deliberate grace, she closes the box, hands it back to the king, and whispers, "Your Majesty, I cannot accept anything that might bring me blame or misinterpretation. It is the perfect refusal, respectful, deferential, but firm enough to stop the room's air from moving." You can practically hear fate leaning forward, intrigued. Henry blinks at her, surprised again. This girl, this soft-spoken, careful, modest girl, denies him not out of manipulation, but out of a sense of morality he finds both foreign and irresistible. Power has surrounded him all his life, bending to his whims, but Jane offers something different: restraint, innocence, a mirror that reflects only the gentlest version of him. And so the king does not grow angry. He grows more fascinated. When Jane leaves the chamber, your pulse follows her like a worried bird. She moves quietly, but the hallways explode the moment she is out of sight. Rumor spreads faster than candlelight in a drought. Courtiers lean in close, exchanging interpretations with the zeal of amateur detectives and the grace of professional dramatists. She refused again? It must be calculated. No, she's not clever enough for that. Exactly why it works. Court logic is its own strange beast. By midday, Anne Boleyn has heard the story. You watch her as she absorbs it, her jaw tightening, her fingers curling around the edge of a table, her heartbeat quickening enough for you to almost feel it from across the room. Anne is clever. She knows how Henry responds to resistance. She knows that gentleness, in the right moment, is more dangerous than seduction. She also knows the old saying whispered among the ladies: the king's affection is a spotlight, once it moves, you're left squinting in the dark. Anne doesn't confront Jane outright, not yet. She circles her with glances sharp enough to cut thread. Jane avoids her, not out of fear but because she has no interest in rising to any challenge. Avoidance is her armor, modesty is her shield, and court envy has no idea how to pierce that. The king, meanwhile, escalates. Over the next few days, he begins positioning himself where Jane might pass: hallways, gardens, even chapel. Each time, he approaches her with the politeness of a man pretending he isn't orchestrating the universe to allow these accidental encounters. It would almost be charming if it didn't feel like watching a bonfire edge closer to a stack of very dry parchment. One afternoon, in a moment recorded only in passing by one distant witness, Henry finds Jane alone near a stairwell. He steps closer, too close, and lifts her hand as though to kiss it. Jane steps back. Not dramatically, not fearfully, simply, quietly. "Your Majesty," she murmurs, "my honor is all I possess." It is the kind of statement no king expects. The kind that feels like a line drawn in sand with a rose stem. Soft, but visible. Henry doesn't push, not yet, but you see something change in his eyes, a decision beginning to form. Faint as the first ripples on still water. The palace notices too. By the end of the week, conversation flows around Jane like a river around a stone. You hear theories, accusations, jealousies, admiration. Some say she is a pawn. Some say she is a strategist. Some say she is a saint. Everyone has an opinion. No one knows the truth. But you know this. Jane is neither ambitious nor scheming. She is simply surviving a role she never auditioned for. And that might be the most dangerous place of all. When she returns to Catherine's chambers at dusk, the Queen greets her with a tired smile. Unaware of the shifting ground beneath their feet, Jane bows, heart heavy, conscience aching in ways she has no words for. She resumes her tasks with trembling hands, feeling the shadow of the king's attention trailing her like a slow, inevitable tide. Outside, the sky turns dark, heavy with clouds. A storm is coming, not loud yet, not violent, but gathering force in the quiet tension between three lives: Catherine, fading in dignity, Anne, blazing in fear, and Jane, glowing faintly in the background like a candle about to be mistaken for dawn. And you stand beside her, aware that she is stepping closer to a turning point that will define her forever. You drift into the next chapter of this tightening courtly knot, and the air feels thick enough to swirl around your ankles as you follow Jane through the palace. Something has changed, small but unmistakable. It's like when you hear a creak in your house at night and try to convince yourself it's probably nothing. Except here, in the Tudor court, nothing is ever nothing. Every shift in tone, every lingering glance, every pause between words is a clue, a warning, or the beginning of a catastrophe wearing silk shoes. Anne Boleyn's world is trembling. You can feel it the moment you step into her chambers behind Jane, who has been sent, somewhat reluctantly, to deliver a message. The Queen is pacing, her gown rustling like an angry breeze. Her ladies hover nearby with expressions that say, "I'd like to be anywhere else right now." The entire room flickers with the anxiety of someone who knows power slipping through fingers doesn't fall silently. It drags down everything around it. Anne spots Jane immediately. Her gaze snaps to her like a hawk noticing movement in tall grass. "Lady Seymour," she says, her tone smooth but threaded with exhaustion. "You have become unusually admired these days." Not a compliment, not an accusation, something far more dangerous, a test. Jane lowers her head, hands clasped so tightly you can see her knuckles whiten. "I serve Her Majesty in all humility," she whispers, and you feel the truth of it vibrate through her. She means it. Her devotion hasn't changed, but the world around her has. Anne steps closer, too close. "Humility is admirable," she murmurs, "but so is loyalty." The silence that follows is not just silence, it's a crack in the earth waiting to widen. You sense Jane's breath shorten. Her eyes remain downcast. She does not answer, not because she has something to hide, but because she knows anything she says will be wrong. In this palace, even breathing too loudly can be interpreted as rebellion. And Anne, whose crown feels increasingly unstable, is hearing every sound with suspicion. When Jane leaves the room, she doesn't walk, she escapes. You drift beside her down the corridor, the weight of the Queen's words clinging to her like damp wool. There's fear there, yes, but also something else: sorrow. Jane mourns Catherine's suffering, respects Anne's struggle, and yet cannot stop the king's attention, which moves like a spotlight searching for a softer subject. And the spotlight is bright today. As you accompany her toward the gardens, Henry appears again, almost as if conjured by her anxiety. His retinue stands a few paces behind him, pretending to admire the trees while very obviously spying. Henry approaches with the kind of eager restraint that says, "I know I should look composed, but I absolutely am not. Lady Seymour," he greets her warmly, "a word, if you please." You feel Jane stiffen, she curtsies, and the king gestures for her to walk with him along the gravel path. Birds chirp overhead, loudly, annoyingly, as if attempting to lighten the tension. The king looks at them with mild irritation. Henry VIII didn't handle competition well, even from nature. They walk in silence for several steps before Henry speaks softly. "You have been placed in a difficult position, Jane. I regret that." The sentence is meant to comfort, but it does the opposite. Power apologizing is more frightening than power intimidating. Jane's voice trembles as she answers, "Your Majesty, I desire no discord." "Nor do I," Henry says, then adds, "but some endings are necessary for new beginnings." You feel the airdrop a degree. That sentence is a hinge on which entire destinies will soon turn. Henry stops walking, he turns to her fully, and in a moment heavy with unspoken consequences, he takes her hand, gently, reverently, but undeniably. "Jane," he whispers, "you are a woman of virtue and peace. A man grows tired of storms." And there it is, the pivot in history. The king, reaching for calm after years of fire. Jane pulls her hand away. Carefully, slowly, almost heartbreakingly. "I cannot forget the queen I serve," she says. Her voice is quiet but resolute. She is not rejecting him, she is pleading with fate to slow down. But fate never slows for Jane Seymour. When she leaves the gardens, the world feels heavier, as if the branches themselves lean in to watch her pass. Rumor ignites through the palace like dry straw catching flame. Anne hears about the walk within an hour. Catherine hears of it too, though she is far from court. Each woman feels the shift like a tremor beneath her feet. And then comes the moment that tilts everything irreversibly. A courtier, never identified, forever whispered about, brings Henry a folded note. Inside it lies a small piece of embroidery, a heart, delicately stitched by Jane's hand. Not a love token, not even directed at him. Just a scrap of her work someone has stolen and twisted into meaning. But the interpretation is enough. Henry presses the cloth to his lips. Anne sees him do it. Her face pales. And you feel the axis of power begin its slow, inevitable rotation. Later that night, you find Jane sitting alone in her chamber. Candle burning low beside her. She is trembling, not from ambition, but from dread. This is not a game she wants. Not a crown she has imagined. She knows queens here are loved briefly, feared often, and punished swiftly. A lesser-known truth rises to the surface. Jane Seymour was never prepared for this. No one trained her for seduction or survival. She is simply caught in a current that is pulling her toward a throne built on the bones of its predecessors. Outside her window, the wind is changing direction. Inside her heart, fear and duty tangle into knots. And you, standing beside her, can sense what's coming. Anne's collapse is beginning. Jane's rise is forming. History is sharpening its quill. You drift into the following days with Jane. And the palace feels like a living creature trying to hide a wound, too quiet in some corners, too loud in others. Every corridor vibrating with unspoken tension. Word travels fast here, faster than reason, faster than truth, faster even than Henry's temper on a bad morning. And the whispers all orbit the same rumor, the same suspicion, the same emerging certainty. Anne Boleyn is falling, and Jane Seymour is rising. But tonight, you're not focusing on Anne's downfall yet, though it shadows every step. No, tonight you're slipping into the sudden, breathless whirlwind of a royal wedding so hasty it almost feels like the court is afraid to look directly at it. As though acknowledging it too clearly might summon lightning. You find Jane in her chamber early that morning, the air cool and smelling faintly of lavender. She sits on the edge of her bed, her hands clasped so tightly they leave small crescents in her palms. There's no joy on her face, only exhaustion, fear, and the silent acceptance of someone who realizes fate has reached into her life and rearranged everything without asking permission. Anne has been executed. The shock hangs over the palace like smoke after a fire. Even now, hours later, it's hard to absorb how quickly it all happened. The trial, the accusations, the verdict whispered with eerie efficiency. Some people are relieved, others uneasy. A few ladies secretly cry in corners because they knew Anne as more than a queen. They knew her as a woman trying to survive an impossible world. But Henry? Henry is radiant. And you sense the contradiction immediately. The court mourns out of caution or custom. But the king moves through the corridors like someone who believes he has escaped a storm rather than helped create one. By noon, messengers whisper that the king intends to marry Jane the next day. Which means, in Tudor time, practically, right now, you trail Jane as she is escorted to a small, sunlit chamber where tailors and attendants swarm like bees around a fragile flower. They measure, pin, tuck, press. They murmur titles she has not yet grown into, Your Majesty. The Queen, mother of the future heir. Jane's breath comes shallowly. She is present, but not fully. It's as though part of her is watching from the corner of the room, wondering how her life became a river she can no longer swim against. And here's a lesser-known truth. Jane asked twice, quietly, trembling, whether she might have time to grieve Anne's death before the wedding. Time to process the weight of becoming queen hours after another queen's execution. She was told, softly but firmly, no. History does not wait, Henry does not wait, and destiny, once invited, tends to slam the door behind it. The next morning dawns pale and too bright for the mood it carries. You feel it as Jane is led through a narrow passage toward the king's private chapel. The wedding is small, shockingly small for a monarch. No grand procession, no exuberant banquets, No roaring crowds. Just solemnity wrapped in silk. Perhaps Henry thinks a quiet wedding makes it look less like a political maneuver and more like a divine correction. You stand beside Jane as she enters the chapel. Her gown simple but pristine. Her veil trembling slightly in the draught like a sigh held between breaths. Henry stands at the altar. Already beaming, he looks younger today, as though he has shed years of turmoil. Love, or relief, does strange things to men who carry crowns. When Jane reaches him, he takes her hands with the eagerness of someone grasping a lifeline. She bows her head. Her voice, when she speaks her vows, is barely above a whisper. You lean close to hear her promise obedience, loyalty, faithfulness, words she understands too well, having watched two queens crumble beneath the weight of those very expectations. As the priest blesses them, you feel the strange, eerie speed of it all. Anne died barely 24 hours ago. Jane is now queen. Henry smiles as though the world has righted itself. Jane looks as though she is balancing on the edge of something vast and unknowable. But the most startling moment isn't the kiss, or the pronouncement, or even the applause that echoes in the chapel like a polite ghost. It happens after the ceremony, when Henry presents Jane to a small cluster of courtiers. "My true wife," he proclaims, "the one I have long deserved." A statement soaked in implication. Everyone hears the accusation in it. Everyone feels the insult to the memory of Anne Boleyn. Barely cold, but no one dares move, breathe, or blink in a way that might suggest disapproval. Jane, meanwhile, stands perfectly still. Her posture is impeccable, her gaze lowered, her serenity so steady it borders on heartbreaking. Because you know, deep in the marrow of this moment, that she understands what Henry expects of her: silence, obedience, peace. She becomes the balm he wants, the antidote to the chaos he blames on others. Yet even you can't help noticing the irony. Jane's quietness, her soft steadiness, her refusal to grasp for power are exactly what will make her history's next storm center. Later that afternoon, after the court disperses, Henry leads Jane into a private chamber draped in white and gold, the colors of joy and purity. He talks to her endlessly, almost giddily, about hopes for their future, for a son, for the stability she will bring. Jane listens with careful respect, offering small nods and gentle smiles like someone tending to a fragile flame. But when he steps away for a moment, you see her shoulders tremble. Just once, a tremble so slight no one else would notice. It's the tremble of a woman carrying not triumph, but the fear of expectations too heavy for one person's breath. You sit with her in the quiet that follows. Late afternoon light casting long shadows across the floor. The crown she now wears, figuratively and literally, feels both light and crushing. It shines, but its edges cut. Outside, the court begins to shift around her new title. Servants rearrange their bows. Courtiers practice new compliments. Advisors rehearse subtle ways to gain her favor. History begins rewriting her place in its pages. Even as she struggles to breathe under the new weight. She is queen. At last. And far too soon. And as evening falls, you already sense the next challenge gathering. Peace is expected of her. But peace is never easy in a kingdom built upon the wreckage of queens. You follow Jane into the early days of her queenship. And at first the palace seems to exhale a long, relieved sigh after years of tension and spectacle. The corridors, once crackling with Anne's fire and Catherine's quiet heartbreak, now feel softer, muted, like freshly fallen snow. People move more gently. Conversations hush themselves without instruction. It's as if the entire court has been recalibrated to match Jane's tranquil pulse. But don't mistake the calm for peace. Peace in Tudor England is never more than a polite illusion wearing borrowed robes. This morning, Jane stands in her newly appointed Queen's apartments. Sunlight streaming across her in muted gold. Everything about the room has changed overnight. The embroidered hangings, the polished wood, the arrangement of cushions, even the scent, now lavender and rosemary. Instead of Anne's sharper jasmine, ladies in waiting bustle around her. Some eager, some hesitant, all evaluating her while pretending not to. Jane feels it in the tiny pauses between their breaths. She is queen now. But she is still Jane, soft-spoken, cautious, observant, and the court is adjusting to that shift with the same awkward energy as a group of actors performing a play without having learned all their lines. You stay close as she moves through the halls, acknowledging bows and curtsies with gentle nods. Her expression remains serene, but inside, you sense her thoughts ricocheting softly. What does a queen say? What does a queen do? How does one wear a crown woven with another woman's ghost? Because make no mistake, Anne Boleyn's presence lingers like perfume, like accusation, like a warning etched in shadow. Jane's first real test of queenship arrives sooner than she expects. During a formal presentation of court petitioners, Henry sits beside her on the dais, radiating satisfaction like a sun that thinks it personally invented light. He keeps glancing at Jane with a tenderness so startling it nearly unnerves the watching courtiers. They've seen Henry passionate, angry, jealous, triumphant. They have rarely seen him gentle. When the first group of petitioners approaches, Jane listens intently to their concerns: a land dispute, a request for leniency, an appeal for aid. She leans toward Henry, speaking softly. Her recommendation is merciful but firm. Henry nods, pleased. The court watches with thinly veiled astonishment. A queen offering counsel without dominance? A king accepting it without defensiveness? It feels like some kind of cosmic clerical error. But Jane's instincts are good. She aims not for glory, but harmony. She embraces the role Catherine embodied but Anne struggled to, the peacemaker, the restorer, the glue in a fracturing political mosaic. Still, beneath the admiration, suspicion simmers. The court has seen meteors before, bright, beautiful, brief. They know better than to assume this peace will last. In the days that follow, Jane brings small changes to the palace. She wears soft colors, pale blues, creams, dove grays, nothing that bites, nothing that startles. Her fashion choices speak a language of gentleness. A subtle rejection of Anne's flamboyance. It's not intentional competition, merely who she is. She reinstates a more conservative court atmosphere, encouraging modest dances instead of dazzling masquerades. She revives acts of charity, visiting the poor, supporting the sick, offering alms. The people love her for it. They see in her a reflection of Catherine's compassion, wrapped in a quieter, warmer package. But there's a wrinkle, a tiny stitch that history often glosses over. Some nobles complain that Jane's modest influence is too soft, too hesitant, too, well, demure. They expected a queen to blaze, not whisper, and historians still debate how much political agency she truly possessed in these early months. Was she intentionally shaping policy? Or simply trying not to drown? You sense the truth hovering somewhere between those two extremes. One afternoon, Jane receives news of the pilgrimage of northern rebels, a lingering echo of opposition to Henry's religious changes. She listens, brow furrowed, fingers lightly gripping the edge of her chair. She thinks of Catherine, of the old days of unity, and of the suffering ordinary people face when kings and commandments collide. "Your Majesty," she says carefully, "mercy might bring the people closer to you." Henry stares at her with narrowed eyes. His smile fades, his jaw flexes. Mercy, especially toward rebels, is not what he wishes to hear. Jane lowers her gaze. She knows she has stepped onto delicate ground. Still, she doesn't retract her words. And that small, quiet act is a seed, courage planted beneath fear. Henry dismisses the idea for now. But you can tell he values her tenderness even when it frustrates him. It softens him at the edges, the way a slow snowfall can soften the harshest landscape. Later, Jane retreats to her private rooms, where she allows herself a moment of vulnerability. She sinks into a cushioned seat, exhales, and closes her eyes. Being queen is nothing like she imagined, mostly because she never imagined it at all. She feels the crown like a physical weight pressing into her skull. Even when she's not wearing it, every decision carries echoes. Every word is an earthquake waiting to happen. Her ladies sew quietly nearby, offering silent companionship. Jane picks up her own embroidery hoop, a small rebellion against the idea that queens should sit still and be decorative. She threads a needle, stitching soft petals in pale pink silk. "You embroider beautifully, Your Majesty," one lady murmurs. Jane smiles faintly. "It keeps my hands from trembling." It's a joke, barely, but it's also the truth. You feel the weight of it settle into the room like dust motes catching late afternoon light. Then a moment of rare calm. Jane walks through the palace gardens at dusk. The air cool against her cheeks. The roses sway gently, whispering secrets only flowers know. Henry joins her unexpectedly, his steps heavy but warm. He talks about the future, the heir he hopes for, the peace she brings, the happiness he believes she represents. Jane listens, holding all his hopes with the careful balance of someone cradling something fragile. In the fading light, she looks almost luminous, the pale shimmer of her gown blending with the silver sky. Her reign has begun not with triumph but with tenderness, a quiet healing after years of turmoil. Yet beneath the tranquility, you can feel the undercurrent. Jane's peace is fragile. The expectation for an heir looms. The court's patience is thin, and the honeymoon calm is never meant to last. But for now, you walk beside her through the soft glow of evening, the queen in soft colors, the calm center of a kingdom that desperately needs her. You follow Jane into the deepening rhythm of her queenship. And at first glance it seems as though the palace is finally learning to breathe at her pace, slowly, gently, almost peacefully. But as you drift beside her through the softly lit corridors, you realize the calm is only a thin lacquer over a structure still groaning from the fractures of the past. Peace here is fragile, brittle, and very much conditional. In fact, the more you listen, the more you hear the echoing truth. Jane's reign is balanced on the sharpest edge of expectation. This morning begins with an audience in the presence chamber. Jane sits beside Henry, composed, attentive, shining faintly in pale blue silk. Her expression is serene, but you sense the quiet scan of her mind as she watches the room. She is learning the rhythm of power, when to speak, when to withdraw, when to let silence do the work for her. The courtiers notice it too. Not loudly, not with fanfare, but in soft glances and measured nods. Yet every compliment whispered about her gentleness is paired with an unspoken but. But can she give the king a son? But can she heal the kingdom's wounds? But can she survive the pressure that crushed the two queens before her? Even you feel it, a soft, persistent weight pressing at the edges of her world. As the petitions begin, Jane listens to grievances with a kind of moral clarity that seems out of place in a court fueled by ambition and survival instinct. She recommends mercy where others would seek punishment. She encourages compromise where others crave victory. Her softness is not weakness. It's persistence, but you sense that persistence is meeting resistance. The king's advisors, seated near the dais, exchange subtle looks, the tightening of a jaw here, a raised eyebrow there. To them, Jane's suggestions feel like disruptions in the well-honed machinery of authority. And here's the twist. Historians still debate whether Jane had any meaningful political influence at all. Some say Henry tolerated her gentleness but never let it shape policy. Others insist that her presence alone smoothed tensions during these precarious months. Watching her now, you understand why scholars can't decide. She seems both central and invisible, like a candle illuminating a room while convinced it isn't affecting the shadows. Later in the day, you follow her into her private chambers, where she meets with her ladies-in-waiting. The atmosphere is lighter here, warm with murmured conversation and the quiet snip of scissors on fabric. One lady comments on a small victory. A noblewoman's petition for her husband's release has been granted. The credit, whispered softly, belongs to Jane. Jane smiles humbly. If it brought comfort to her household, then I am grateful. She means it sincerely. This is who she is. But as you watch, you feel the subtle tremor beneath her calm. The expectations surrounding her, fertility, influence, stability, are pressing harder. Some of the ladies, when they think she isn't looking, exchange glances that speak of hopes rising too quickly. Jane notices more than she lets on. Her hand still briefly over her embroidery, her breath catching in her throat. For a moment, it almost feels like the room tilts. Henry arrives later that afternoon, buoyant in mood, one of his sunny days, which means everyone else is allowed to exhale. He takes Jane walking through the gardens, speaking animatedly about reforms, banquets, hunting expeditions, and, inevitably, the future heir. The way he talks about it, you can tell he no longer sees it as a possibility. He sees it as a promise he expects Jane's body to keep. You feel her discomfort in the small stiffening of her spine, the way her fingers lace tightly in front of her. She does not contradict him. She simply listens, nodding at the right moments, carrying the conversation as if it were a delicate object that might shatter with too firm a grip. But then Henry veers into a subject that reveals the fissures beneath their calm. "The people grumble still," he says, tone serious. "They want the old ways, old rituals, old comfort." He glances at Jane. "You understand them, perhaps better than Anne ever did." Jane remains silent for a beat too long, and you hear the caution ringing inside her. Henry is not merely asking for understanding. He is asking for agreement, for validation, for her to gently affirm that his past decisions, however turbulent, were justified. She swallows. "Your Majesty has done what you believed right for England." A careful answer, but not quite the affirmation he wanted. The silence afterward feels like thin ice forming under your feet. Later, when Jane returns to her rooms, she sinks into a cushioned chair and lets out a slow breath she didn't dare release earlier. One of her ladies brings her spiced wine, and Jane accepts it with a trembling hand. She isn't frightened, she's burdened. Burdened by the impossible task of being both comfort and catalyst, healer and heir-bearer, queen and moral compass. And hovering over it all is the truth no one dares speak aloud. Peace hangs by a thread, and she is expected to hold it. That night, a soft rain falls over the palace, tapping the windows like urgent fingers. Jane stands by the glass, watching droplets race each other down the panes. The candlelight behind her turns her silhouette into something ethereal, beautiful, but lonely. You feel her thoughts tug like delicate threads. Am I enough? Am I what he needs? Am I what England needs? Questions too heavy for someone so gentle, yet entirely inescapable. A final small detail brushes the edge of your awareness, one of those truths history forgets to spotlight. Jane begins keeping a small prayer book by her bedside, more diligently now than ever. Its pages fill with silent pleas for strength, guidance, and patience. She reads it each night before sleep, fingertips brushing the thin parchment like a fragile anchor. Tonight, she closes it slowly, almost reverently. Outside, the rain quiets. Inside, her resolve steadies. The peace she embodies may be fragile, but it is real, and she will hold it, if only because no one else can. The kingdom sleeps uneasily. Jane sleeps with hope clutched like a whisper. You move with Jane through the palace the next morning, and you can feel it before anyone says a word, the shift. The expectation, the tightening focus of an entire kingdom that has decided to aim its collective hope directly at her body. The air is heavy with it, like humidity before a storm. Every gaze that brushes across her lingers just a second too long. As if searching for signs, hints, prophecies, Jane walks carefully, gracefully, but even you can sense how her steps carry new weight. This is no longer merely about being queen. This is about producing the heir Henry VIII has sought with the kind of single-minded determination usually reserved for treasure hunters or people assembling IKEA furniture without instructions. And Henry? Well, he's practically vibrating. You see it during their morning meal, an intimacy of quiet conversation interrupted by the king's restless glances. His fingers tapping the table, his voice growing bright whenever he speaks of the future. An heir, he murmurs, will unite the realm, end the discord, restore God's favor. His belief hangs in the air like incense, thick and unbreakable. Jane nods softly, offering a gentle smile that doesn't quite reach her eyes. Because here's the unspoken truth. She knows the pressure. She's felt it since the moment the crown touched her head. But now it's blooming, slowly and surely, into a weight on her ribs. A weight she cannot shrug off. Later that day, Jane meets with her ladies, who flutter around her like anxious birds. They fuss over her diet, her rest, her walks. Someone suggests she avoid steep staircases. Another recommends warm milk with honey. A third whispers, "My aunt swears by keeping a blessed sprig of rosemary under the mattress." You can't help but smile. It's like Tudor Pinterest. Questionable remedies and lots of enthusiasm. Then one of the ladies shares something more curious. A midwife in London claims that royal fertility can be encouraged through rituals of blessing, involving sacred relics, prayers, and, unexpectedly, touching a carved wooden cradle said to have belonged to one of Henry's ancestors. Whether any of this works? Unlikely. But does the court cling to it? Absolutely. People in the 1500s will believe anything if it promises babies or banishes evil humors. And yes, historians still argue over whether Jane actually participated in some of these rituals. Some say she merely tolerated them. Others whisper that she embraced them quietly, hoping to ease the kingdom's expectations. Watching her now, you see a woman walking a tightrope, modest enough not to chase superstition, but gentle enough not to crush anyone's eagerness to help. In the afternoon, you follow her to the palace gardens. Remarkably, she and Henry aren't alone. A small procession of courtiers trails behind them, just far enough to avoid overhearing words, but close enough to witness history in case it decides to happen spontaneously. It's less a stroll, more a mobile theater. Henry speaks earnestly, waving his hands as he describes estates he intends to restore once stability returns. How the kingdom will prosper. How their future son, always a son, will rule wisely. Jane listens, serene yet guarded, answering in soft tones that smooth the edges of his excitement. But then Henry mentions something that makes her pause. He's arranged for special blessings from selected clergy. Ceremonies designed to call God's gaze upon their marriage. And yes, that is exactly as intimidating as it sounds. Jane lowers her eyes, pressing her gloved fingers together. The idea of public holy rites feels overwhelming. But she cannot protest. Instead, she whispers, "If it brings comfort to your majesty, then may God's will be done." Henry beams. You, meanwhile, feel the atmosphere tighten around her like a corset pulled one notch too far. As evening approaches, the court gathers for a modest supper. The hall glows with warm candlelight, reflecting off silver goblets and polished wood. Musicians play quietly in the corner. For a moment, everything feels almost peaceful, almost normal. Then it happens. Jane stands to excuse herself. A brief hand to her stomach. A faint sway. Barely anything at all. But the entire hall stirs like startled birds. Eyes widen. Fans flutter. Forks pause mid-air. Henry leaps to his feet so quickly his chair skids backward. "Jane, are you well?" She blushes. "Merely a moment of dizziness. Your Majesty." That's it, just a moment. But for Henry, and for a court starved of good news, it's enough. Whispers erupt. It's a sign. She must be with child. The Queen is expecting. Never mind that no physician has confirmed anything. Never mind that Jane herself hasn't said a word. The court has decided. And what the court decides often becomes reality long before truth catches up. Henry spends the rest of the meal beside her, hovering protectively. He brings her cushions, insists she sit, offers her dishes she politely declines. His devotion tonight is radiant, almost overwhelming. Jane, gentle as ever, manages soft smiles, though you can feel her discomfort pulsing like a quiet ache beneath the surface. A lesser-known truth floats at the edges of this moment. Jane adored children. Truly, she had a genuine affection for them that many witnesses recorded, tender, warm, instinctive. She wanted to be a mother. But wanting something and carrying the pressure of a nation are two very different things. Later, in her private chambers, Jane removes her headdress with trembling hands. She sinks into a cushioned chair as her ladies fuss around her again, offering advice, reassurance, hopeful prayers disguised as suggestions. Jane listens, nods, but her mind feels distant, caught between anticipation and fear. You sense it clearly. The battle between desire and obligation. She touches her stomach lightly, almost reverently. May God grant me strength, she whispers. The candle beside her flickers. Shadows dance along the walls. The room feels quieter than usual, as though the palace itself is holding its breath. A single moment of dizziness may not mean pregnancy, but it means possibility, and in Henry's court, possibility is enough to reshape the future. Jane exhales slowly, folding her hands in her lap. A new chapter is forming. A promise. A pressure. A hope carrying the weight of an entire nation. And you feel the story tighten again, pulling her toward a destiny no one could ever escape, not even a queen of gentle peace. You follow Jane into the next days, and the palace feels like it has swallowed a secret too large to hide gracefully. There is a hum beneath everything, a vibration in the tapestries, an echo in the corridors, a glimmer in every sideways glance. No one says anything directly, of course. This is still the Tudor court. But everyone thinks it, hopes it, fears it. The Queen might be with child. Jane walks with more attention now. Not because she feels unwell. She actually feels perfectly normal, but because the weight of everyone's expectation presses down like an invisible hand guiding each of her steps. You sense how aware she is of her body in a way she never had to be before. A flutter in her stomach becomes a suspicion. A yawn becomes a sign. A moment of stillness becomes a royal omen. And honestly, the poor woman can't sneeze without three ladies exchanging meaningful glances. This morning, when Jane enters her privy chamber, her ladies greet her with the kind of overly bright politeness people use when they're trying to appear calm but are absolutely not calm. Jane sits, adjusting her sleeves, and within moments they're hovering around her with offers of cushions, warm drinks, supportive smiles, and, of course, suggestions. Your Majesty, perhaps you should avoid long walks. Your Majesty, perhaps you need more rest. Your Majesty, fresh pears are excellent for women in your situation. Jane blinks slowly. She isn't in a situation. Not yet. But try telling a Tudor court that. As she sips her watered wine, you feel her longing for a moment of quiet certainty. She wants to know if she truly carries the hope of a nation. But for now there is only waiting, waiting wrapped in nervous smiles and embroidered advice. By mid-morning, the whispers have grown legs. Two maids pass in the corridor and you hear one murmur. The Queen is glowing, which, to be fair, Jane always kind of glows because she is Jane Seymour and that's her brand. But to the court, glow equals pregnancy, and pregnancy equals salvation. Later, Jane meets Henry in the gardens, and the king's mood is a full orchestra of delight. He looks younger again. Kings in love with the idea of an heir tend to de-age like magical plants. He takes her arm as they walk beneath budding trees. And you notice the way he studies her profile, not in lust, but in reverence, like she is a relic imbued with divine promise. "You seem well, my love," he says gently. Jane smiles softly. "I feel quite myself today." "Good," Henry replies, though you see the flicker of disappointment that she has no miraculous pregnancy symptoms to report. "We must safeguard your health. England depends upon it." That sentence lands with a thud you feel in your own bones. England depends upon it, no pressure. But then comes something rare. Henry grows quiet, thoughtful. His hand brushes hers, not possessively, but with tenderness. "Jane," he murmurs, "you have brought peace to my life. To my court, to my very soul." He pauses, as if the next words carried too much hope. "God willing, he will give us a son to secure our future." Jane's breath catches. She nods, her expression serene, but you feel a tremor beneath her composure. This is not just a king's fancy. This is the heartbeat of a kingdom, and she is expected to embody it. When they return inside, the palace is buzzing again, not openly, but through the particular choreography of servants pretending not to gossip. A bow held 2 seconds too long. A suppressed smile. A poorly disguised wink. The atmosphere feels like a beehive politely insisting it is not a beehive. And then a mild surprise. A midwife is summoned. Not officially, not publicly, just quietly enough that people assume it must be serious. Jane sits nervously as the midwife, competent, calm, experienced, asks a series of questions. Too many questions. Questions that make Jane blush and one of her ladies pretend she is suddenly fascinated by a tapestry of a stag hunt. Afterward, the midwife gives a neutral answer. Not a confirmation, not a denial, just professional uncertainty wrapped in polite phrases about early days and God's timing. Essentially Tudor medical talk for, maybe? Of course, this neutrality does nothing to calm the palace. In fact, it causes even more speculation. By dinner, 3 separate rumors circulate simultaneously. 1. The Queen has fainted, she has not. 2. The Queen has been sick twice, she has not. 3. The Queen craves pears, she does. But she always has liked pears. Please relax. You drift behind Jane as she eats in the Great Hall. And you can practically feel the stares hitting her like soft hailstones. She smiles politely, picks at her food, and tries to remember how to be a human under observation. At one point, she sets down her spoon and every pair of eyes swings to her instantly. Even Henry freezes. "I was only adjusting my sleeve," she murmurs. Her ladies gasp with relief. Later that night, Jane retires to her chambers. You feel the shift when the door closes, her shoulders loosen. Her breath steadies, without the weight of 100 watching eyes. She becomes herself again, gentle, thoughtful, a little anxious. She sits by the window. Moonlight spills across her lap like liquid pearl. She rests a hand on her stomach, not expecting, not assuming, just wondering, feeling the enormity of possibility. And here's a fascinating truth rarely discussed. This period of, maybe pregnancy, was one of the most mentally taxing stretches of her reign. Not because she feared motherhood, but because she understood what was at stake if she failed. Catherine had suffered for not producing sons. Anne had lost everything when her pregnancies faltered. Jane has learned from their stories. Their echoes haunt her. She whispers a prayer, soft, trembling, earnest. Grant me strength, Lord, whatever may come. Her voice blends with the quiet hum of the night. The candle flickers. A breeze stirs the heavy curtains as though offering reassurance. And just as she prepares to retire, a curious, lesser-known detail surfaces. Jane takes out a tiny charm, an amulet given to her by her mother long ago. A small token meant to protect women in childbirth. Jane rubs it between her fingers, drawing comfort not from superstition but from memory. She places it beneath her pillow. Not as a declaration, but as hope. And you feel it, pulsing quietly beneath the moment. Change is near. Not confirmed, not announced, but gathering like a soft tide rising against the shore. The court is watching. Henry is dreaming. Jane is hoping. And history is inching closer toward a truth that will alter all their lives. You slip into the next stretch of days with Jane. And the palace feels like it's caught in a long inhale. No one willing to breathe normally until certainty arrives. There is something strangely suspenseful about this waiting period. Like being at the theater and knowing the curtain should rise any moment, but it just keeps trembling instead. Jane moves gently through this tension, and you drift with her, sensing how every quiet moment swells with possibility. It happens mid-morning, subtly, without fanfare. Jane rises from her bed feeling different, light-headed, warm, strangely aware of herself in ways that make her pause. She presses a hand to her abdomen, not fearfully, not dramatically, just instinctively, the way someone feels the pulse of a question they finally dare to ask. Then a soft wave of nausea rolls through her, not overwhelming, but unmistakable enough that she sinks slowly back onto the mattress. Her ladies rush forward, alarmed. Jane tries to shoo them off gently, insisting she's only tired, but the glances they exchange say everything. This is it. And you can't blame them. This court has been waiting for a sign the way people wait for the first raindrop in a drought. Within minutes, the palace knows. No one announces it, no herald cries it from the steps. But whispers sprint through corridors, duck around corners, slip under doors. Even the guards seem to stand taller. The baker downstairs supposedly burns a loaf because his mind is racing ahead to congratulatory feasts. Somewhere, a violinist begins practicing celebratory melodies. Just in case. Henry is informed while in council. He freezes mid-sentence. His advisors stiffen, unsure whether to salute, speak, run, or faint. Then Henry stands, pushes back his chair with enough force that it nearly topples, and strides out of the room like a man possessed. You follow him down the corridor, his steps loud, fast, almost boyish in their urgency. He reaches Jane's chambers breathless. She is sitting calmly now, sipping water, still pale but composed. Henry kneels beside her with such reverence that even the ladies bow their heads at the intimacy of it. "My love," he whispers, "is it true?" Jane blushes. "We must wait for the physicians to be certain." Henry's joy is immediate, unrestrained, flooding the room like sunlight. He takes her hands, kisses them, praises God, praises fate, praises everything within reach. His voice breaks slightly on the words. At last, at last. You feel the tremble in Jane's breath, not fear. Not exactly, but something close to awe. The possibility is becoming real. Physicians arrive by midday, 3 of them. Because Tudor medicine firmly believes quantity makes up for quality. They examine her carefully, ask intrusive questions, poke gently, listen solemnly. When they finally step back, their expressions hover between pride and professional smugness. It is highly likely, the eldest declares, that Her Majesty is with child. Highly likely, not definitively, not confirmed, but to Henry, and to the court, these words might as well be the voice of heaven. Celebrations erupt instantly. Bells ring. Servants scattered to prepare feasts. Courtiers scrambled to compose congratulatory phrases that sound sincere but also sufficiently flattering. One overeager noblewoman faints on the stairs purely from excitement. Or drama. Possibly both. Jane, meanwhile, sits quietly amid this swelling tide of joy. She looks serene, but you can feel her heart fluttering against her ribs like a bird tapping to be let out. She has wanted this. She truly has. But wanting something and becoming the bearer of national destiny are entirely different experiences. A lesser-known detail emerges around this time. Henry orders that doves be released in her honor. Dozens of them, soft wings fluttering into the sky in symbolic harmony. Unfortunately, several of the birds circle back around and perch on the palace roof for the next 3 days, cooing so loudly that Jane can hear them from her chambers. Not exactly the peaceful omen Henry intended, but charming in its own chaotic way. In the following days, Jane's world shifts dramatically. Her meals are now curated with scientific precision, Tudor scientific precision, meaning more superstition than nutrition. Her walks are shortened, her rest extended, her body treated like a holy relic wrapped in velvet. You watch her try her best to remain gracious as everyone hovers over her like anxious hens. She doesn't complain, she rarely corrects anyone, but when she is finally alone, truly alone, you see her sit in silence. Palms resting gently over her stomach, eyes soft with wonder and fear entwined. Then come the rituals. Henry insists on blessings for her pregnancy. Clergy visit, prayers fill the chapel, nobles bring offerings, and you witness something that borders on surreal. Jane Seymour, who once moved quietly through Catherine's chambers as a modest lady in waiting, now stands at the center of England's spiritual and political universe. She participates dutifully, respectfully, but with humility that makes the clergy glance at her with unexpected admiration. Her sincerity is disarming. She doesn't crave grandeur. She simply accepts the role placed upon her. And here, drifting just behind her shoulder, you notice something intimate and rare. Jane keeps touching her prayer book throughout these ceremonies. Not as a prop, not as performance, she touches it for strength, grounding herself amid the overwhelming expectations. But the court is not satisfied with prayers alone. Late one evening, a noblewoman approaches Jane with what she calls a fertility charm. A tiny carved wooden token. Jane smiles politely, accepts it, and places it among her personal items. Not because she believes in its magic, but because she understands the giver's hope. People want to feel part of the miracle. As the first trimester deepens, signs of pregnancy become unmistakable. Jane begins experiencing waves of fatigue. Her appetite fluctuates. Her body feels unfamiliar, both precious and precarious. She confides quietly to one of her ladies that she fears making any misstep. Even a small one, that might endanger the child. The truth is simple and profound. Jane wants this baby not for the crown. Not for Henry, but because she desires a family of her own. She adores children. She wants to hold her own child. Love them, raise them gently. The pregnancy becomes her anchor and her vulnerability. One evening, you find her by the window, gazing out at the moonlit gardens. She presses a hand to her abdomen, breath soft as she whispers a promise. I will care for you, as best I can. And you feel the shift in her spirit, new determination, quiet strength, a fragile but fierce hope rising inside her. The kingdom is holding its breath. Jane is nurturing a miracle. And history is preparing for the child who will change everything. You move with Jane into the slow, swelling anticipation of late pregnancy. And the palace responds as though the very stones are listening for the rhythm of the child within her. Everything feels heightened now, sounds sharper, air warmer, emotions stretched thin like parchment left too close to a fire. And you, drifting at her side, sense how the approaching birth shapes the entire kingdom's mood. Even the courtiers who ordinarily complain about the weather, the food, or each other suddenly speak with reverence, as if raising their voices might disturb the unborn heir. Jane wakes before dawn most mornings, and today is no exception. Pale light spills through her chamber, diffused by embroidered curtains. She turns slowly, carefully, and sits up with the kind of deliberate motion that comes from months of protecting a growing life. Her hand rests instinctively atop her rounded stomach. The movement is so gentle it feels like a prayer in motion. Her ladies enter shortly after, fussing quietly, offering warm cloths, tiny sips of broth, soft encouragement. They hover like guardian birds, chirping helpful suggestions while trying not to appear panicked. Because late pregnancy in Tudor England isn't a gentle stroll toward motherhood, it's a narrow bridge with no railing. Everyone knows it, no one says it. Jane greets them with a faint smile. She is tired, exhausted. Actually, but she carries herself with serenity. The kind that makes even her most anxious attendants steady themselves. As she prepares for the day, the chapel bells ring outside, slow, solemn, resonant. They're not tolling for tragedy, they're calling for prayers. For her, for the child, for the future. And you can't help but notice how the sound seems to vibrate through the walls and through Jane's bones at the same time. After breakfast, Henry arrives. He's radiant, positively glowing. Actually, you've seen the king happy before. But this version of him is almost disarming. He places a hand on Jane's shoulder with such gentleness that you barely recognize the man who once raged through halls and shattered marriages with a single decree. Pregnancy has turned him into something else entirely, a father already in spirit. He kneels beside Jane, yes, kneels and murmurs, "My love, how do you fare today?" Jane smiles, "As well as I may. Your Majesty, the child is active." Henry beams, pressing his hand lightly to her stomach, feeling for the faint motion beneath her gown. You watch the awe bloom across his face. The entire realm narrows to this moment. Henry whispers something soft you can't quite hear. Perhaps a prayer or a promise, and then he rises reluctantly. As he leaves, the courtiers bow deeply, and you sense how their hope clings to him like dust to sunlight. The king is happy, the queen is thriving, the heir is coming. England holds its breath in fragile harmony. But beneath this surface calm lies a curious detail, one rarely discussed. Certain members of the court are uneasy. Not about the pregnancy, but about the rituals surrounding it. Henry has revived old blessings, half-forgotten ceremonies, and obscure superstitions he once ignored. Some courtiers whisper that he's dabbling too heavily in symbols, mixing piety with desperation. Others wonder privately if these practices might anger factions already frustrated with religious reforms. Historians still debate how much these rituals influenced Jane's experience, whether she found comfort in them or endured them out of duty. Watching her now, you sense she views them as burdens wrapped in goodwill. Heavy, but bearable. As the weeks pass, the palace becomes a stage for expectation. Musicians rehearse lullabies. Seamstresses stitch impossibly tiny gowns embroidered with gold thread. Advisors draft proclamations in advance. Even the cooks experiment with sweet cakes, appropriate for the celebration of a prince. No one dares say if, only when. One afternoon, you accompany Jane to the gardens. The air is thick with late summer fragrance, roses, warm earth, ripened fruit. She walks slowly, supported by two ladies, her breath shallow but steady. When she stops near a fountain, she places both hands on her belly and closes her eyes. You feel it before she speaks, the shift inside her, the tightening, the quiet contraction. This little one, she murmurs, is eager to greet the world. Her ladies exchange excited glances. They ask questions. Jane shakes her head gently. Not yet, she whispers, but soon. And soon arrives faster than anyone expects. That night, Jane wakes with a start, gripping the edge of the mattress. The pain rolls through her in a wave, slow, deep, inevitable. She breathes through it. Her ladies fly into motion, summoning midwives, warming water, preparing linens. The corridors outside ignite with hushed footsteps and muffled urgency. Jane labors for hours, long, exhausting hours. Each contraction a reminder of how thin the line between life and death can be in this century. You feel the intensity of it through her breathing, her trembling hands, the sheen of sweat on her brow. She remains composed, whispering prayers between waves of pain. The midwives murmur reassurance. The ladies work tirelessly, their fear tucked behind steady expressions. Then Henry arrives outside the chamber. He cannot enter, custom forbids it, but he stands at the door. Listening, pacing, praying. Occasionally he asks for updates, his voice cracking despite his attempt to remain regal. You sense his desperation. He has lost so much, hoped so fiercely. His future is in the hands of a woman he adores and a child he has not yet seen. And then, finally, it happens. A cry. A newborn's sharp, glorious cry, tiny but triumphant. It fills the chamber, spills into the corridor, ripples through the heart of the palace like a miracle arriving on a single breath. Jane collapses back onto her pillows, exhausted, tears shining in her eyes. A midwife places a small, warm bundle in her arms. Jane looks down, her expression melting into awe. "You have a son, Your Majesty," the midwife whispers. "A son." England roars with relief. Outside, Henry shouts in jubilant disbelief, praising God so loudly you're fairly certain he heard him without assistance. Courtiers scattered to spread the news like sparks on dry grass. Bells begin ringing, celebrations ignite spontaneously. Even the guards break into reluctant smiles. Inside the quiet chamber, Jane gazes at her child, Prince Edward. Tiny and perfect, wrapped in white linen, she touches his cheek with one trembling finger. Her voice, when it comes, is barely a whisper. "My precious boy, my gift." And you feel the sorrow hovering just behind that joy, not because anything has gone wrong, but because the moment is so beautiful it aches. Because Jane has stepped into history's light so brightly that the shadows deepen behind her. But for now, the room glows with triumph. A queen's long-awaited miracle has arrived. You move with Jane into the hours and days after Edward's birth. And the palace feels transformed, washed clean by jubilation, vibrating with triumph, lit from within by the glow of something England has waited nearly a generation to receive: a long-awaited male heir. Even the air seems lighter, tinged with the scent of celebratory spices drifting from the kitchens and the echo of church bells that have not stopped ringing since dawn. Everywhere you drift, people exude the kind of joy usually reserved for miracles or the sudden disappearance of taxes. But inside Jane's chambers, the atmosphere is very different, gentler, softer, shaped by the quiet intimacy of a new mother cradling her child. Jane lies propped against embroidered pillows, her cheeks pale, her expression glowing with a fragile, exhausted joy. The ladies bustle around her like a constellation of murmuring stars. But Jane hardly notices them. Her focus is entirely upon the tiny life resting against her chest. Edward. Her perfect, impossible, precious son. You float closer, watching her fingertips trace the curve of his cheek, the downy softness of his hair. She whispers to him in a voice that trembles with awe. This is the culmination of everything she has endured: the pressure, the fear, the expectation, and now, holding him, she looks as though she has stepped into a place beyond all that noise. A quiet meadow of maternal wonder. Henry bursts into the room shortly after sunrise. He is radiant, gleaming, practically incandescent. If joy could wear armor and strut, it would look exactly like Henry VIII in this moment. He strides to Jane's bedside with outstretched arms, barely containing the force of his happiness. "Jane," he breathes, eyes shining, "you have given me what no queen before you could. You are my true love now. And forever." The court later repeats these words as proof of his devotion. But in this intimate chamber, spoken from a trembling king to a weary queen, they feel heavy with sincerity. Henry kneels beside the bed, something a king almost never does. He gazes at Edward the way other men gaze at salvation. He touches his tiny son's head with reverence. The expression on his face is not just pride, it's relief. Deep and visceral, the unwinding of a tension he has carried for decades. You sense something else too, an overwhelming love for Jane, a softening in him that history rarely records. The court erupts into celebration later that day, banquets, processions, proclamations. Servants run through halls carrying trays overflowing with spices and sweetmeats. Musicians race to tune their instruments. Nobles scramble to draft congratulatory letters so exaggerated they might as well be poems about the invention of happiness itself. But Jane misses all of it. She remains in her confinement chamber, recovering, resting, cradling her child, and you notice something the court chooses not to see: she is tired. Deeply tired, more than a woman should be after childbirth. Her breaths are shallow, her cheeks, though luminous, lack color, yet she clings to her son with the fierce, instinctive devotion of a mother determined to hold on. A lesser-known truth hovers here: Edward's birth was long and arduous. Some accounts mention complications, others speak of prolonged labor. And historians still debate whether the methods used, traditional Tudor practices mixed with questionable medical interventions, may have weakened Jane more than anyone realized at the time. Still, for now, the kingdom concerns itself only with joy. Throughout the day, dignitaries are brought in to glimpse the royal newborn. They bow deeply to the tiny prince. Marveling at his perfection, Jane watches them with a serene smile, proud, protective, maternal. She thanks them softly, her voice always warm, always gracious, even as exhaustion pulls at the corners of her strength. When Henry returns in the afternoon, he refuses to let ceremony dictate his joy. He lifts Edward into his arms with surprising gentleness, pacing the chamber as he admires the boy. He will be a great king, Henry declares, eyes glowing, strong, wise, unshakable, England's future. Jane watches him with a mixture of love and relief. For the first time since she stepped into the tangled world of queenship, she feels secure. The crown no longer rests on the fragile promise of her virtue or the shifting currents of Henry's affections. She has given him an heir. Her place is certain, untouchable even. The court knows it too. Everywhere you drift, you feel the shift in how people speak her name. Queen Jane now carries reverence, pride, and awe. She has done what two queens before her could not. She is the peacemaker, the mother of the heir, the woman who will be remembered. But memory, as you well know, can be a bittersweet archivist. That evening, as the palace hums with festivities she cannot attend, Jane rests quietly. Her ladies coax her to eat, but she takes only a few bites. She is too weary, too full of emotion, too overwhelmed by the enormity of this new life she holds in her arms. Her lips brush Edward's forehead. "You are my joy," she whispers, "my blessing." The room dims as twilight settles. The child sleeps, the queen dozes, and you feel a soft thread of unease weaving itself into the edges of the moment, not enough to disturb the beauty. but enough to remind you that joy and fragility often walk hand in hand. The nation rejoices. The bells ring on. Henry dreams of a future secured. And Jane, luminous but waning, holds her son close as the world celebrates outside her door. You slip into the dim, candlelit quiet of the following days. And immediately you feel it, an unsettling stillness gathering at the edges of Jane's world. The celebrations continue around the palace in bright, echoing waves. But here, in the Queen's chambers, something softer, heavier, more fragile is unfolding. Joy still lingers in the air. Yes, but it now floats alongside a subtle, creeping concern. Jane is not recovering as she should. At first, it is simply exhaustion, perfectly normal after childbirth, especially one as long and grueling as hers. Her ladies reassure themselves with pleasant whispers. Her Majesty only needs rest. Queen Jane is simply tired. All mothers feel this way. You drift with them as they move quietly around the room, adjusting linens, offering sips of broth, smoothing her pillows. They speak softly, as if volume alone might disturb her fragile strength. But you sense it in Jane's breathing, the shallow pull, the faint tremor beneath each exhale. She holds Edward, yes, but not for long before she must surrender him to waiting arms. Even then, her eyes never leave him. There is love in that gaze. Immeasurable love, but also a hint of dread that grows as her strength wanes. By midday, the ladies begin to exchange looks, small, worried glances passed between them like secret notes. One lady touches Jane's forehead and finds it too warm. Another notices her gown damp near the neckline where perspiration has gathered. And when Jane tries to sit upright, a sharp pain folds her inward like silk collapsing on itself. Still, no one speaks openly of fear. Fear, in Tudor England, is something you whisper to God, not to each other. Physicians are summoned, several, in fact, because when the Queen of England shows signs of weakness, no one takes chances. They arrive with solemn expressions, their robes rustling like dry leaves. They bow, examine her, exchange hushed professional murmurs. Their tools are limited, their knowledge imperfect, but their concern is unmistakable. Their conclusion? Jane has a distemper. A vague Tudor term large enough to fit anything from infection to exhaustion to the wrong arrangement of planetary influences. They prescribe rest, warmth, and various concoctions that smell worse than they taste, a high bar indeed. But you see it, you feel it, something deeper is wrong. And here lies a lesser-known truth that history often skirts around. Postpartum infections were heartbreakingly common in this era. Even queens, with all their privilege, stood only a single misstep away from danger. Some records suggest that the attendants, in their eagerness to honor tradition, may have hindered her recovery. Others imply more direct complications. Historians still debate which practices helped and which harmed her. But whatever the cause, Jane's decline has begun. Henry visits her chamber in the late afternoon, and the air shifts around him like a sudden wind. He enters with optimism still clinging to his expression, but it falters the moment he sees his wife, pale, trembling, her breath thin as dew. He rushes to her bedside. "My love," his voice cracks. Henry VIII, the man who strode through life with the confidence of a lion in a field of mice, suddenly looks unbearably human. His joy of the previous days collapses into urgent tenderness. Jane smiles faintly. "Our son is well?" she whispers. "He is perfect," Henry breathes, taking her hand in both of his. "He thrives. Just as you will." Jane closes her eyes, relief flickering through her, but her grip lacks strength. And you watch Henry's face shift, concern tightening his jaw, darkening his gaze. He sends the physicians from the room with brisk commands. He orders fresh linens, warmer stones, more attendants, more prayers. He speaks to her gently, as if sheer willpower might anchor her to this world. But when Jane drifts into a fevered sleep, Henry steps aside, and you see something rarely documented: fear. Raw, unguarded fear. Outside the chamber, the court buzzes. They celebrate Edward, yes, but their joy feels quieter now. Their laughter edged with unease. Servants whisper that the Queen is resting, that she is tired, that all will be well. But you hear the doubt beneath their reassurances. It echoes down the palace halls like a distant tremor. As evening deepens, Jane awakens briefly. The candlelight flickers across her face, revealing a sheen of perspiration and a pallor that seems to drain her from within. She asks softly for Edward. Her ladies bring the infant, swaddled and warm, and place him gently in her arms. The moment he rests against her, something remarkable happens. Her entire expression softens, brightens, even through the fever's haze. She presses her lips to his forehead, breathing in his scent as if it alone could strengthen her. "My sweet boy," she murmurs, "my little blessing." Her voice trembles, not from weakness, but from love so powerful it aches. She holds him for as long as her strength allows. When her arms begin to falter, her ladies lift the child away with gentle precision. Jane's eyes follow him until he disappears behind the velvet canopy. Tears slip down her temples, not from despair, but from the tender, aching longing to stay present, to stay strong, to stay alive for the tiny life she brought into the world. Night rises fully now. Shadows pool thickly in the corners. The feast and revelry beyond these walls feel like a memory from another lifetime. Inside this chamber, only candlelight, whispered prayers, and the rhythmic echo of Jane's weakening breaths remain. Henry returns once more. He sits beside her, his large hand enveloping hers, his thumb brushing her knuckles with a care that surprises even you. "You will recover," he murmurs, as if saying it aloud could force the world to obey. "You must. Edward needs you. I need you." Jane opens her eyes one last time and whispers something too soft to catch. Henry leans in, tears gathering at the corners of his eyes. The moment lingers, fragile, suspended, like a candle flickering before the wick curls. And although she still breathes, you feel it unmistakably. Something is slipping beyond reach. The court senses it too. The palace grows quieter. Even the celebration outside dims, as though the kingdom itself is listening, waiting, fearing. Jane Seymour, mother of the long-awaited heir, is fading, and history holds its breath. You drift into the following hours, and the palace feels changed, subtly at first, like a room where someone has quietly blown out half the candles. The celebrations have tapered into murmurs, the music has softened into silence. Even the servants move more slowly, more carefully, as if the air itself has thickened with dread. And at the heart of that dread lies Jane, fading like a pale flame struggling against a rising wind. Her chamber is warm, too warm, the windows covered to keep drafts out. Heavy tapestries trap the heat. And yet Jane trembles beneath her blankets. Her fever climbs and dips and climbs again in the unpredictable rhythm of an illness no Tudor physician has the tools to master. You feel the weight of the room pressing inward, not just worry now, but fear. Jane stirs weakly, eyes fluttering open, her gaze searches for someone she cannot quite see. And one of her ladies hurries to moisten her lips with cool water. Jane whispers thanks, though the sound is barely more than a breath. Her fragility fills the space so entirely that even the rustle of a gown feels too loud. The midwives gather at the foot of her bed, their faces drawn tight. They whisper among themselves, not gossip, but uncertainty, and their hands tremble as they exchange bowls of herbal infusions and warmed cloths. A few women cross themselves. Others simply look away, because looking too long at a dying queen is like staring at the sun through smoke. You feel the burn even if you turn away in time. And then Henry arrives. You can hear him before you see him, the hurried steps, the low commands, the forced calm cracking at the edges. When he enters the room, his composure shatters completely. He moves to Jane's bedside with the urgency of someone trying to outrun fate. "Jane," he whispers, taking her hand, "my heart, my love." She tries to smile. It flickers, faint and trembling. "Your Majesty," she breathes. "No," Henry interrupts softly, his voice breaking. "Not Majesty. Henry. You're Henry." It is a plea as much as a correction. Jane's hand feels small in his, almost weightless. He brushes her knuckles with his thumb, trying to warm them, as though warmth might coax her back toward life. You notice how fiercely he watches her chest rise and fall, as if memorizing the pattern. He speaks with the tenderness he rarely allowed himself. "You have given me everything. Everything." His voice catches, softening around a truth he cannot bear to say aloud. "And I will not lose you. I cannot." Jane's eyes glisten, though she has no strength to cry. "Edward," she murmurs. "He is well," Henry answers quickly, leaning closer. "He is strong, perfect, just like you made him. Our boy thrives." Jane exhales a shaky breath, relief softening her features. She whispers something too faint to hear. Henry bends closer, his ear brushing the edge of her pillow. You lean in, too, as if the world itself is straining to catch her words. "Promise me," she whispers, "he will be raised with gentleness." Henry closes his eyes. When he opens them again, the king, the forceful, unyielding ruler of England, is gone. In his place sits a man stripped to his most human fear. "I promise," he whispers. "On my life, I promise." The room is silent but for Jane's weak breaths and the soft crackling of a single candle flame. Even the attendants stand motionless, bearing witness to this intimate unraveling of a king's heart. A lesser-known truth stirs here. Henry VIII, the king who defied popes and wielded executions like political punctuation, was utterly undone by Jane's decline. Some reports claim he refused to sleep, remaining constantly at her side. Others say he prayed with a desperation bordering on frantic. Historians still debate which accounts are accurate. But the emotion is undeniable. You see it now. Raw and vulnerable. Jane's condition worsens as the night deepens. Her breathing grows shallow, uneven. At times she slips into a fog of fevered dreams, murmuring to people who aren't present, her mother, her siblings, perhaps even Anne or Catherine, though no one dares record such eerie tenderness. Then she wakes, pupils wide and unfocused, clinging briefly to Henry's voice as her anchor. "You're getting stronger," he tells her. "You are loved," he tells her. "You will recover," he tells her. And yet each reassurance trembles with denial. At one point Jane grips his hand with more strength than she has shown in hours. "I am not afraid," she whispers, though her voice trembles. "God has been good to me." Henry bows his head against her fingers. His shoulders shake. You feel the enormity of his grief press against the walls until even the candlelight seems to dim. Outside the chamber, the palace waits in suffocating silence. No celebrations, no music. The bells remain still. Courtiers pace their rooms, whispering updates that change with each retelling. Servants linger near doorways, too anxious to sleep. Even the guards, trained to stand emotionless, look exhausted from dread. Inside, Jane drifts in and out of consciousness. Her ladies wipe her brow. They whisper prayers. One of them tries humming a lullaby she used to sing during long nights of courtly service. The tune is thin and trembling, but it fills the heavy air with a fragile thread of comfort. When Jane wakes again, her gaze seeks Henry. She finds him instantly. "Do not grieve," she murmurs, though each word is a cost. "Be strong for our son." Henry breaks, truly breaks. "You are my heart," he chokes. "I cannot, Jane, please." His voice collapses. Her fingers brush weakly against his wrist, a gesture filled with impossible tenderness. "You have your heir," she whispers. "England has its prince." Her breath catches. You feel it, subtle, fragile, fading. "And I." She pauses, searching for strength. "I have been happy." The room trembles with silence. She closes her eyes once more, and her breathing grows shallower still. Each rise and fall is slower, softer, like the tide pulling back from shore. The night holds its breath. Henry holds her hand. You hold the moment. Jane Seymour, gentle, steady, beloved, slips closer to the edge of life. And the darkness deepens around her. You drift into the next day, if day can even be measured in hours when the palace feels trapped inside one long, unbroken moment of dread. Morning light seeps weakly through the high windows, pale and indifferent, as though even the sun hesitates to intrude upon the sorrow saturating the Queen's chambers. Every sound is softened, every step is measured, every breath feels like a question no one wants answered. Jane is fading. You see it instantly as you move beside her bed, her face drawn and waxen, her lips pale, her breaths shallow and uneven. The fever has tightened its grip. Sweat beads along her brow even as her skin grows cold beneath the surface. The midwives move quickly but quietly, exchanging looks that say far more than their words dare. What they prepare now is no longer meant to heal. It is meant to comfort. Henry has not slept. He sits slumped in a carved chair pulled as close to the bedside as possible, his elbows on his knees, Jane's limp hand resting in both of his. His hair is unkempt. His eyes, usually sharp and commanding, look clouded, drunk on fear and grief. You sense the disorientation in him, the helplessness of a man used to forcing the world to bend, collapsing in a place where authority has no power at all. He whispers her name again and again. Jane, my Jane. Each repetition sounds more like a plea to the universe. She stirs faintly. Her eyelids lift just enough for you to glimpse a shadow of her once soft, luminous gaze. She sees him. She knows him. A fragile smile tries to form, so small it nearly breaks you. My lord, my love, she breathes. Barely audible. Henry leans close, brushing hair from her forehead with trembling fingers. I'm here. I'm with you. You're safe. She tries to answer, but the words dissolve into a shallow sigh. A lesser-known truth lingers in the background. Henry VIII had been warned that childbirth could be perilous. But he never truly believed death could reach his queen. Not this queen, Jane, who had brought peace to his life, who had given him the son he believed destiny owed him. Her death was unthinkable because to Henry, love and certainty often walked hand in hand. And now certainty is slipping from his grasp. Outside her door, the palace waits. Nobody celebrates anymore. No bells ring. No music plays. The newborn prince sleeps peacefully in the nursery, unaware that his arrival has become entwined with his mother's slow departure. Servants tiptoe through corridors as though noise might hasten the tragedy. Inside, Jane's breathing grows weaker. Her ladies take turns wiping her forehead, whispering prayers, holding her hands when Henry must briefly step away to compose himself. Some cry silently, others hold their tears back so fiercely their faces strain with the effort. Because no one wants Jane's last sight to be sorrow. They want her to see love in every direction. Will she recover? A young lady in waiting whispers to an older one. The older woman closes her eyes, a gesture filled with centuries of knowing. We pray, she says softly, the answer every Tudor woman has given when the truth is too cruel to speak. Henry returns, sinking back into the chair, taking Jane's hand once more. Her fingers barely curl around his. Jane, he whispers, bending so close that his forehead touches her knuckles. If you could see our son, if you could see him, you would know you've given England its future. You've done everything I ever dreamed. Jane's lips part. You lean closer, feeling the gravity of her final efforts. Henry, she whispers, voice fragile and thinning, love him gently. Henry closes his eyes, tears slipping down his cheeks. I swear it, he breathes, on my soul, I swear it. She exhales, slow, trembling, with a small nod, as if that oath allows her a measure of peace. Her breathing falters, pauses, resumes, thin and fragile. The midwives exchange a glance, one brief moment of shared knowledge. Grim and resigned. For hours, the room dwells in a suspended hush. Henry barely moves, afraid that releasing her hand might loosen her last tether to life. The candle flames falter, shadows shift, and the world seems to narrow down to the small space between her breaths. Then, sometime in the late afternoon, no one later remembers the exact minute, Jane's eyes open one last time. She doesn't speak. She simply looks toward the window. toward the faint autumn light, her lips curving into something that might be a smile. A peaceful expression, soft and final. Her chest rises, falls, and does not rise again. The silence that follows is absolute. A tear slides down Henry's cheek, not in a burst, not in a sob, but in a long, aching descent that carries something inside him with it. A breaking, a realization, a grief large enough to stagger a king. The midwives bow their heads. Her ladies weep softly. A chaplain nearby begins to pray. But Henry sits frozen, staring at her face as if willing it to return to life. "My Jane," he whispers. You feel the loss radiate outward, slow and crushing, filling the room, then the corridor, then the palace, then the entire kingdom like a shadow settling over autumn fields. Jane Seymour, gentle Jane, peaceful Jane, beloved Jane, has died. The queen who healed the king's heart. The mother who gave England its heir. The woman who entered history softly and left it even more softly. And as her light fades, the world shifts around the void she leaves behind. You drift through the palace in the aftermath of Jane's passing, and everything feels muted, colors dulled, sounds softened, emotions drained of their usual sharpness. Grief has wrapped the court in a thick, trembling stillness. Even the birds outside seem to sing more quietly, as though sensing that a gentle presence has just slipped away forever. You feel the hollowness ripple through the corridors, a strange mixture of disbelief and sorrow settling like a cold fog. Henry is nowhere to be seen at first. Not in the great hall. Not in the council chamber. Not even in the nursery where his newborn son sleeps. He has retreated to his private apartments, the door guarded by men who exchange worried glances but speak to no one. The king who once moved through the palace with thunder at his heels has vanished into solitude. And the absence of his presence, so vast, so heavy, spreads its own kind of fear. In Jane's chambers, her ladies move like ghosts, folding linens, extinguishing candles, gathering the small, intimate objects she held dear, her prayer book, her embroidery hoop, the tiny charm her mother once gave her. Each item is touched with reverence, as if it still carries her warmth. You linger among them, sensing the grief etched into every movement. One of the women pauses, holding Jane's last embroidery, a half-finished flower, and presses it to her heart, whispering something too soft to catch. The newborn prince, Edward, sleeps peacefully under the constant care of nurses. He knows nothing of loss, nothing of the sorrows swirling around him. His world is small, warm, safe, but every person who gazes upon him does so with complicated eyes, adoration for the future he represents. Grief for the mother who gave him life at the cost of her own. And then, at last, Henry emerges. You feel him before you see him, a heaviness, an ache, a storm without wind. When he steps into the corridor, he looks like a man aged years in a single night. His eyes are swollen, his expression stunned. He walks slowly, as if the palace itself has become unfamiliar. His counselors hover nearby but do not approach. No one dares. Henry moves with the fragile anger of someone whose grief has not yet decided whether to collapse or explode. He goes first to the chapel. The candles flicker as he enters, casting unsteady halos on the stone walls. He kneels, something he rarely does, and the weight of his body seems to drag the entire room down with him. You drift closer, hearing only fragments of his prayer. Mercy, my beloved, why must God take every joy I find? There are tears on his face. Real tears. Raw, quiet, devastating. And here's where the historians disagree, bitterly. Endlessly. Some argue Henry loved Jane more deeply than any of his other wives. That she was the calm in his storm. Others claim he loved the idea of Jane, the gentle queen who gave him a son, the peaceful figure who never challenged him. They debate whether his grief was profound or performative, lasting or fleeting. But watching him now, you know this much. In this moment, Henry's mourning is real. It hurts him. It frightens him. It exposes the part of him he never lets the world see. When he rises, he walks to the nursery. The nurses freeze, bowing as he approaches. Henry steps toward the cradle and looks down at the tiny child wrapped in soft linens. His expression shifts, grief folding into something quieter, steadier. He reaches out and touches Edward's small hand, then withdraws as if the contact has scorched him. You will never know her, he whispers, voice cracking, and that is the greatest sorrow of all. He stays long enough for the nurses to exchange glances of mingled pity and awe. Then he leaves abruptly, unable to bear the weight of the room. Later, Henry orders the palace draped in mourning colors, black, somber, absolute, no music, no feasts, no laughter. He withdraws from council meetings, from public appearance, from nearly everything. Courtiers whisper that he barely eats, barely sleeps, barely speaks. The man who once commanded armies now struggles to command even his own breath. Jane's body is prepared for burial with the tender precision reserved only for queens and for beloveds. Her ladies bathe her gently, braid her hair, dress her in garments she once wore on peaceful mornings. They place a rosary in her hands, a symbol of the devotion that always anchored her. You linger near her still form. She looks calm, almost luminous in the stillness of death, as though she is resting, waiting for someone to wake her. There's a softness to her expression that tells you she left this world the way she lived in it, quietly, gracefully, without reaching for anything that was not hers. Henry refuses to attend the preparation rites. He cannot bear it. But he will attend the funeral. When the day arrives, the entire court gathers in somber formation. The air is thick with incense and cold autumn wind. The procession moves slowly, agonizingly slowly, toward St. George's Chapel. Jane's coffin, draped in white for purity rather than black for mourning, glides forward on silent shoulders. Henry follows on horseback, wearing black armor polished to a mirror sheen. He does not look left or right. His face is a carved mask of grief and fury and disbelief. You sense his emotions roiling beneath the surface: love, loss, guilt, devastation, perhaps even a strange sense of betrayal that life dared take something from him. When Jane is laid to rest, the choir's voices rise, a haunting, aching sound that fills the chapel with reverent sorrow. Henry stands unmoving, as if pinned in place by grief itself. Afterward, when the court disperses, he remains in the chapel long after the candles burn low. "What am I to do without you?" he whispers into the shadows. His voice breaks. And you realize something profound. Jane Seymour, the quietest of Henry's queens, has become the wound he will carry for the rest of his life. You follow the slow ripple of days after Jane's funeral, and the palace feels suspended, caught between mourning and motion, between the weight of what has been lost and the force of life insisting on continuing anyway. Grief lives in every corridor. It clings to tapestries, softens voices, turns footsteps hesitant. Even the autumn air drifting through the windows seems muted, as if reluctant to bring its chill too abruptly to a kingdom already shivering under sorrow. The infant Prince Edward is thriving. That becomes the court's single point of comfort. Nurses tend to him with delicate precision, cradling him as though he is made of spun glass and prophecy. He stretches tiny fingers, yawns softly, and sleeps with the peacefulness of someone who has no concept of fate or expectation. When you drift near his cradle, you sense the quiet miracle of him, a future, a hope, a continuation. But the fragility of that hope trembles beneath the surface. Edward is small, frail, even. Many newborn princes had begun sturdier than this. And still history claimed them. The midwives exchange uneasy glances. Physicians hover too often, and whispers slip like smoke along the edges of the nursery. He is delicate. He was born early? No, born weak. God protect the little prince. Everyone knows the truth, even if he is a hope. He is a precarious one. And here's another lesser-known truth. In the days after Jane's death, certain members of the court quietly wondered if the cost of England's long-awaited heir was too steep. Some believed the sacrifice was divine will. Others called it a tragic irony. A few whispered that the child might carry some echo of that loss within him, though they'd never dare voice that superstition aloud. Henry, meanwhile, is unraveling. You find him in his private apartments, pacing like a man trapped in a labyrinth built from his own grief. His hair disheveled, his clothing neglected, his footsteps heavy as if gravity has singled him out. Advisors approach him cautiously, offering condolences or matters requiring his attention. But he waves them away with impatient gestures. He doesn't want counsel. He doesn't want politics. He wants Jane. And the realization that he cannot have her gnaws at him, sharp as a blade with no handle. He visits Edward often, sometimes several times a day. At first he stands beside the cradle, staring down with a strange mix of awe and terror. Then he reaches out, touches the child's small hand, and a rare softness enters his eyes. But the softness is brief. Always brief. Edward coos, tiny and unaware. Henry whispers, "You will hold England's future." Then beneath his breath, "And you carry your mother's memory." He sees Jane in him, not simply as his heir, but as the last tangible piece of the woman he lost. And that truth haunts him. You drift through the council chamber next, where the advisors and noblemen discuss Edward's future with all the measured gravity of men handling a live spark. They debate caretakers, tutors, nurses, and religious instruction. Their voices weave into a tense tapestry of political calculation and genuine concern. One counselor says, "The prince must be guarded night and day." Another argues, "He must be raised in robust health, fresh air, sunlight, supervised exercise." A third mutters under his breath, "He is but a fragile child. May God strengthen him. Historians still debate how physically frail Edward truly was during his earliest months. Records contradict each other. Some paint him strong and vigorous, others delicate and sickly, but watching him now, with his tiny fingers curling, his breath soft and fluttering, you see truth in both interpretations. He is a miracle, yes, but a breathing, beating reminder that life is fragile for even the most precious child in the kingdom. Later, you find Henry wandering the gardens alone. The autumn leaves crunch softly beneath his boots. He pauses beneath an archway of bare branches, staring out toward the horizon with an expression carved from pain. You feel the depth of his sorrow, the bewilderment in him. Why must joy demand such payment? He whispers to no one. His voice is heavy, trembling with a man's grief that cannot be soothed by crowns or power. He clenches and unclenches his fists, anger rising, falling, rising again, anger at death, at God, at fate, perhaps at himself. For Jane's absence has become a wound without closure. Even his famously swift ability to remarry falters here. Courtiers whisper that Henry will take another wife soon. England needs stability. But the king dismisses all conversation on the matter. He refuses to meet potential brides. He avoids festivities. He withdraws further. And that withdrawal alarms the council. A grieving king is unpredictable. A grieving king with a newborn heir is even more so. Meanwhile, Edward's nursery becomes the soft, glowing heart of the palace. Jane's brother and the Seymour family gather there often, hovering protectively over the precious child. Their presence is political, of course, but also genuinely familial. They adored Jane. They want Edward to survive, flourish, carry on her legacy. One afternoon, Jane's sister, Elizabeth Seymour, lifts Edward and hums a gentle lullaby. The tune is one Jane herself used to sing during her own childhood, an old melody from Wolf Hall. You watch Edward calm beneath the familiar rhythm, a living bridge between the woman who bore him and the future he cannot yet comprehend. Then you notice something else. Henry stands in the doorway, silent, unmoving, his expression raw. He listens to the lullaby, and the sorrow on his face deepens with an almost unbearable tenderness. He steps forward, speaks quietly. He has her peace. Elizabeth nods, eyes bright with tears, and her sweetness. Henry swallows, throat tight. God grant he lives to show it to the world. Because the fear is everywhere now. Fear that the fragile miracle Jane died to bring forth might fall over too soon. Fear that Henry's last thread of hope could snap. As night falls, you drift back to Henry's chambers. He sits alone, staring at a small wooden chest. Slowly, he opens it. Inside lies the embroidered heart Jane stitched long ago, the one a courtier once presented to him. Mistaking it for a love token, Henry lifts it with trembling hands, brushing his thumb across the uneven threads she once touched. The symbol of a love she never proclaimed yet somehow lived fully in every quiet gesture. He presses it to his chest. "My Jane," he whispers, voice breaking, "you are gone, but you have left me our son." A tear slips down his cheek. "And I will honor you through him." In that lonely vow, you feel both truth and desperation. Edward's legacy begins here, not with power, not with strength, but with a father's grief and a mother's last gift. A fragile heir. A fragile future. And a kingdom balancing on one small heartbeat. You drift into the final movement of Jane's story. And the palace feels like a place suspended between memory and expectation. Every corridor holds a faint echo of her soft footsteps. A quiet smile. The gentle calm she carried like a lantern through a storm. Yet life, as it always does, presses forward. The world does not stop for grief. Not even the grief of a king. And so you follow the slow rearranging of England around the absence of its quiet queen. Prince Edward grows steadily in his cradle, still small, still delicate, but alive, thriving in the insulated warmth of the nursery. Nurses hover around him with nervous devotion, as though protecting him protects the memory of the mother he will never know. You sense the tension beneath their whispering. Jane died in giving England its future. Now that future must be guarded at any cost. The Seymour family holds a place of prominence now, rising gently, cautiously, through the political ranks. Not triumphantly. Jane's death has tempered any sense of victory. They move with the quiet dignity she embodied, aware that their fortunes are tied to a child whose breaths are watched as carefully as the stars. Henry, meanwhile, is a man split down the middle. You drift beside him through his private chambers, where he spends long stretches in contemplation, sometimes prayer, sometimes silence, sometimes pacing with restless, haunted steps. He avoids the court. He avoids festivities. He avoids the glimmer of anything that might remind him how swiftly joy can vanish. When counselors gently suggest the need for a new queen in time, someone to help raise Edward, to provide additional heirs, Henry snaps with unexpected fury. "I had a perfect wife," he rasps. "God will not give me another." But kings do not grieve like common men. Their personal loss is also a national dilemma. England requires stability, a wife, a mother for its child king to be. And though Henry resists, though he mourns, though he wraps himself in memories of Jane, time pushes him onward. Still, for now, his grief reigns. One evening, you follow him to the chapel, always the chapel. He walks slowly, shoulders hunched beneath the weight of a loss even he cannot command away. The candles flicker against his armor as he kneels where he once prayed for Jane's recovery. A soft echo of his earlier words seems to linger in the stone. Why must joy demand such payment? He bows his head. The silence holds him like an embrace and a reprimand all at once. Even now, his counselors whisper cautiously behind closed doors. Some insist Jane was his truest love. Others dismiss that notion, saying Henry simply loved the serenity she brought him. Historians still debate whether his heart mourned her above all others or mourned the idea of her, the perfect, gentle queen who fulfilled his deepest desire for a male heir. You, standing beside him in this moment, know that grief is never clean, never easy to categorize. Henry's sorrow is messy, inconsistent, flawed, and deeply, painfully real. He rises slowly, wipes his eyes, and returns to the nursery. When he gazes at Edward this time, you notice something shift in him, not sharply, but like the slow settling of dust after a long storm. He reaches into the cradle, lifts the tiny boy, and holds him against his chest. The child stirs, sighs, nestles into the warmth. Henry closes his eyes. "You will know her," he whispers, "through me." It is a promise. Not perfect. Not poetic. But sincere. As the weeks roll onward, Henry begins attending council again, though with a heaviness that drags behind him like an invisible cloak. He makes plans for Edward's care and tutelage. He reviews laws. He orders Jane's tomb to be constructed with the greatest reverence, ensuring she rests in St. George's Chapel, where eventually, he too will choose to be buried. It is a choice that speaks louder than any declaration of love. Because for all his complexities, his mistakes, his contradictions, Henry VIII will bind his eternity to Jane Seymour in stone. You drift one last time through the palace gardens. Leaves scatter in the wind, swirling like the remnants of stories the world has already begun to reshape. Jane's presence lingers here, the calm she brought, the kindness she offered, the peace she carved into a kingdom tired of storms. Her reign was brief. Her impact, immeasurable. Her memory, soft and enduring. And through Edward, England's fragile, precious future, her legacy continues to echo. Quiet and steady, like a heartbeat the world strains to hear. End of script. Sweet dreams.